greatly. And I know that the travel time and the unpredictability of the traffic has been frustrating and extremely difficult, from late school buses, canceled medical appointments, interruptions for local businesses. Everyone who has to travel on or near the Washington Bridge has been affected, including my own constituents from the other side of the state in Kent County. This afternoon, we will hear from Director Peter Alviti, the Director of the Department of Transportation, Joseph Alman, Senior Deputy Chief of Staff from the Governor's Office, and Jeffrey Klein, a representative of VHB Engineering, to begin our own inquiry into the events leading to the sudden closure of the westbound side of the Washington Bridge. Public, please, I want you to understand that this meeting is just a first step of information gathering so that we can understand the procedures at DOT. We as legislators want to publicly disclose the information that we have gathered and present it to all of you in the public in an orderly, logical fashion, so that our constituents, especially the residents of the East Bay, can try to get a handle on what's been happening. As we know, the news has been coming from all over and in many directions, and sometimes it's disjointed, sometimes it's very difficult to keep things in an orderly timeline. This is not the meeting where we will point fingers and assign blame because we don't have all of the information yet. We have to be cognizant that there is an ongoing forensic investigation, and DOT is doing its own report to remedy the situation. We have a federal inquiry going on, and I'm sure both of them will bring more facts to light. I promise that we will continue to investigate, and we will continue to hold everyone involved accountable. So thank you for listening to my statement, and Chairman McKenney also has a few words.
The people of Rhode Island are not pleased with this situation. East Bay residents, understandably, are most upset. But it's not just them. I know Rhode Islanders have a reputation for not wanting to travel too far, but I can tell you that I have folks in my Warwick district that are far from Washington Bridge, and they're not happy. West Bay people do go to the East Bay. They go there to enjoy Colt State Park, visit family, shop, go to restaurants, spend money, and East Bay folks do the same in Providence and in Warwick and other West Bay towns. People frequent businesses around the area near the bridge in East Providence and Providence. We all have relatives, we have friends, we have doctor's appointments on the other side of that bridge. So from my perspective, we shouldn't downplay it and suggest that people suck it up or just deal with it. People are dealing with it, and even when it's at its worst. So we're recognizing the situation for what it is, and what it is a failure at the very least of the bridge and its supports. But to many Rhode Islanders, at least what they've seen so far, it also appears that it could be a failure of other things, including planning, design, engineering, maintenance, inspections, or leadership. It could. We don't know. But that's how many see it right now. Maybe the information that comes out today, our efforts here, will show that that's not the case, but we need to find out. And we need to do that because there are concerns that go beyond this bridge. Clearly, there are folks out there who are worried or perhaps losing confidence in bridges generally, in infrastructure generally, because they have concerns about whether inspections are appropriate, whether or not maintenance has been appropriate on the roads they're traveling. The fact is, Rhode Islanders want answers, Rhode Islanders deserve answers, and we are going to do our job as we're legislators charged with oversight of seeking to get the necessary answers. Thank you. That's my statement, but I would like to also make a few comments with respect to our process here today so folks understand what we're trying to do. I think it only takes a view of how many people we have up front here to understand that logistically this is a bit difficult. And so what we have done with 10 senators and 17 reps is we've asked people to do their best if they could to limit their inquiries to a couple of issues. We don't want to have one person going on for 45 minutes to the detriment of everyone else who wants to ask questions. But we will give as much leeway as we possibly can, and we will particularly give leeway to those folks who are most impacted, the East Bay and the area around the bridge. And so we want to make sure that everyone understands we do view this as essentially a preliminary hearing. We understand there's a great deal more information that is coming. We apparently won't have the forensics until the end of February, early March. The same with a number of the other assessment reports. And so with that in mind, we will do our best today to get the answers we can get at this point. And gentlemen, we welcome you all here. Director Alviti, if you want to begin, please do.
Gentlemen, just make sure your button's up when you do speak, okay? The red button on your microphones are up.
Thank you so much. The first person that will be addressing you today is Joe Almond from the Governor's Office. Then I'll make some opening statements, and then we have a representative of VHB who will be offering some engineering insight as to the engineering work that's going on, where we are, and give you a status of that so you have an understanding of the work that's going and how it's progressing. So, Joe?
So good afternoon. I just have some brief remarks on behalf of Governor McKee. I do want to thank Chairwoman Serpa and Chairman McKinney for an opportunity to be here today and be in front of this committee. The Governor's Office, as well as DOT, and I'll let the Director speak for himself, we look forward to providing you all the information we have to date and to answer any questions related to this bridge. What I want to do simply is give you, Governor McKee, I've handed out a time frame that I won't go back to, I won't reiterate, but on December 11th, as you all know, Governor McKee spoke with the Director at about 2:52 in the afternoon. He spoke with the Director at about 2:52 in the afternoon, and at that time the Governor was notified of a critical structural defect on the Washington Bridge, which the conversation he was informed it presented a potential threat to life if the bridge was not closed. So in prioritizing public safety to prevent a life-threatening tragedy, a decision was made with the Director to close the bridge. And as everybody has said so far, we know this causes a major disruption for many Rhode Islanders on both sides of the bridge. And so we do sincerely thank everybody on the committee as we work with the Director and with the many agencies we have working on this with us to gather all the facts we can for you and to come to an expedient, but not just a rushed, an expedient, but a safe resolution to this problem. The Governor has said publicly many times, we will fix this bridge, but we'll do it right, but safety will remain the top priority as we move forward. So the Governor's Office, after receiving the call from Director Alviti, throughout the evening, the Governor received a briefing, or probably more than one, from Director Alviti, from EMA Director Mark Pappas, and his other cabinet members as to the status of the closure, and that involved that evening getting the closure done, as well as outreach to the local emergency management officials that then had to react on both sides of the bridge, especially the East Providence side, pertaining to rescue trucks, emergency vehicles, and whatnot. The next morning, the Governor met with Director Alviti at the bridge and started to get briefed by the bridge engineers, and again, reviewed any public safety response. At that point, there was plans made to open an emergency lane for the emergency responders. And at that point, at some point in this juncture, we developed what we call a critical response team of different government agencies, of various agencies, because you've heard the two chairs mention that the impact of this bridge is well beyond traffic or structure. It's schools, it's public health, as you heard Chairman McKinney, but it's also the social services. It's our transportation services to non-emergency medical that we do through our DHS. It's commerce. It's schools. It's public health of appointments, people trying to make appointments. So we're trying to develop tools as well as have all the agencies work on outreach to these people. How can we assist them? And that's what we're in the process of doing every day. And then what we've done is, along with DOT is currently conducting a structural assessment of the bridge with engineering firms. The governor's office has conducted an independent firm to work only with the governor's office, independent of all the others, to evaluate and oversee all the inspections that have been done, are being done, as well as the forensic findings. So only with these findings are we going to be able to move forward and come up with a final scope of work, a timeline to do it, and a cost to do it. And we really, as the committee chair said, we look forward to coming back if need be to share this, or share it in any way it comes out, but to share it with all the affected people in the communities. What I've done is I put in your packet the governor's timeline, the engineering information, the engineering firms. I'm not going to go a lot further with this because you have the information. I'm open to any questions you have about what I've given you, and I know we'll move on. So if there's no questions right now, and we can always come back, I'll turn it over to Director Albidi.
Yeah, Mr. Alman, I think that's how we're going to proceed. We would like the three of you to do your presentation, and then to keep this manageable, we're going to alternate my right, my left, a senator, a rep, a senator, a rep. So we'll have the three of you presenting. Director?
Thank you, Chairwoman Serpa and Chairman McKinney. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today to answer very important questions that I'm sure you all have. I'd like to start out as Joe Alman did, in making a few opening remarks. It's important for me to start by saying that the closing, we know, I know, the people at DOT know, we feel it every day. We know that it's made things very difficult. It's made frustration, disruption. It's affected small businesses. It's affected moms and dads getting their children to school. It's affected the neighborhoods in terms of quality of life, so the neighborhoods surrounding these areas. It's affected folks just trying to get to their jobs. Their doctors, their schools, their errands. We know this. We hear it. We live it. The folks, some 700 folks that work with me at DOT, all to some degree are sharing that experience with you. I want to let you and the public know that these same 700 people and myself are working 24/7. We eat, drink, and sleep the problems of this every day, and trying to find the solutions to it for everyone. It's our top priority. It's number one. The decision to close the westbound lanes of the Washington Bridge was necessary. No doubt in my mind at all, in the 50-some-odd years that I've been an engineer, that this was the safest course of action for the state of Rhode Island. While this is tough, we've all seen what could happen if the safeguards that we put in place and the closure that we put in place didn't take place. We've seen it, we've heard it, what happens to bridges that fail due to structural deficiencies. We saw it in California, Indiana, Minnesota, New York, Washington, Connecticut, and other places, where collectively hundreds of lives and thousands of people, hundreds of lives were lost and thousands of people were injured. It's an awesome responsibility to care for that. Above all else, at DOT, we're working every day to make sure that that does not happen here in Rhode Island. And while I admit not perfect, and that is the topic of much discussion lately, and the reason that we look forward to engaging with you all to explore the additional checks and balance we have implemented and will be implementing at RIDOT, but also the ones that we've already implemented during the last 8 years that prevented that kind of a tragedy from taking place here in Rhode Island. Many have asked about the timeline of notifications in the case of the Washington Bridge. So here's the DOT timeline of findings and notifications. On Friday, December 8th, at about 10 a.m., VHB, Vanasse Hagen Bruslin engineers identified a structural safety issue on the bridge, on the Washington Bridge, and VHB's engineer contacted RIDOT's project manager, Anthony Pompey, project manager of the Washington Bridge project. Following that notification, Anthony Pompey instructed VHB to continue gathering information on the severity of the safety issue and directed VHB to notify RIDOT's bridge engineers, John Price and Keith Golan of our bridge engineering group. On Friday, on that same day at 1:40 p.m., VHB submitted via email and a video clip and photographs for the department's review. RIDOT bridge engineers reviewed the email and asked for additional information on the tie-down rods in span number 7. Over the weekend of December 9th, a team of engineers were assembled from VHB along with RIDOT bridge engineers who performed additional inspections and gathered additional information for the department. On Monday, December 11th, 2023 at 11:30 a.m., a meeting was held at RIDOT among RIDOT's project management team, the construction management team, the bridge engineers, VHB, and AECOM engineers to analyze the information gathered over the weekend on the inspections. And on noon of that same day, RIDOT's chief engineer, Robert Bracchio, chief operating officer, Lauren Doyle, and the Division of Project Management Director, Lori Fazette, joined the meeting, and they were presented with the results of the inspections and analysis that took place over the weekend and were given recommendations. Lori Fazette ordered a 2 p.m. in-person meeting at RIDOT with project management, construction management, bridge engineers, AECOM, and VHB team of engineers, along with the Barletta Aetna, the design build contractors currently working on that bridge rehabilitation project, to discuss the investigations and the next necessary actions to be taken, such as closing lanes, posting weight restrictions, or closing the bridge. The parties at the meeting reached a unanimous consensus to recommend that the bridge be closed for safety purposes. At 2:24, the chief engineer, chief operating officer, and director of project management called me with a recommendation to close the bridge and apprised me of the findings of the weekend's analysis. I reviewed the information and I agreed with their consensus. At 2:51, I texted the governor and asked him to call me on an urgent matter. At 2:52, he called me. I briefed him on the findings of the staff and the engineers, and I recommended closing the bridge to him. The governor and I discussed the findings and the conclusion that was reached, and the governor and I made the decision to close the bridge to protect public safety. Once the decision to close the bridge was made, we implemented the process of closing the bridge and began cross-governmental coordination. Our chief engineer called Major John Allen of the Rhode Island State Police and Mark Pappas of the Rhode Island Emergency Management Agency. Our chief operating officer contacted the FHWA Administrator Derek Torrey, and our bridge engineer called FHWA's bridge engineer. We also notified the mayors of both East Providence and Providence at that time. At 3:15, we held a meeting with Colonel Weaver and his staff at the Rhode Island State Police and Director Pappas to discuss closing the bridge at 5 p.m. From 5 p.m. until midnight, we put up signage and detours to support the closing of the bridge. We knew we had to find out in great detail what the state of the bridge was and what might have caused the damage reported and what path forward there might be. From that point in time to now, we've hired 7 expert engineering companies to analyze the entire structure to provide us with comprehensive assessments of the scope of the deficiencies and what can be done to restore the full flow of traffic to the Washington Bridge, and recommendations on how to rebuild the bridge structure. These engineers have been working 24/7. They're helping us resolve the issue and to understand it in greater detail. They know, as well as I know, and all of you know, the urgency of the situation, and we're all eager to resolve this as quickly, but not compromise their ability to do a thorough job in their analysis. AECOM is our owner's representative for the existing design build contract, who we have retained for the beginning purposes of this analysis that we're going through. The joint venture team of Barletta Aetna is the design build team on the existing project, who we have retained to already begin work on repairing the initial finding of the pins. VHB works for them as part of their design build team. VN Engineers is doing the computer modeling analysis on the structure and taking the findings of the various engineering companies and implementing them into a finite computer model of the entire bridge structure to help everybody understand what the various alternatives might be and what the interactions of forces on the bridge are with consideration to the defects that we're finding. All of these companies are working together on a daily basis with our project management group and our bridge engineers, and with the FHWA structural engineers, expert structural engineers. They're all working together as a team. The firm of Michael Baker is doing an in-depth inspection of the bridge using high-tech monitoring equipment. Michael Baker, in turn, has hired BDI engineers, which is monitoring the bridge for movement and assessing some of the post-tensioning components of the bridge, while Consor Engineering is taking care of the underwater inspection of the piers that support the bridge structure. We expect our final report, or at least a report that will give us an indication of their findings, by the end of February, early March, that will provide us with the data that we need to collectively make a decision on what the reconstruction of this bridge is going to look like, what the scope of it is, what it will include, and how it will be accomplished. It provides us with the path forward, basically. We're working every day to get people's lives back to where they used to be. That's the mission. The mission, certainly the bridge is part of it, the inspections, all of the information that everybody needs us to share with you is all part of it. But the mission is to get people's lives back to what they were before the closing. And I assure you, we're going to be doing this as quickly as possible while keeping people safe. Working in parallel to all of these other efforts, the forward-looking efforts, our traffic engineers' main priority right now is working with other engineering companies, traffic engineering companies, to do all they can to get the traffic moving better. Their mission is to mitigate the disruption that's taking place, that people are feeling from traffic delays. We've set up a website that hopefully will inform people on various aspects of travel over the bridge. There are real-time maps that you can interact with to get, as of right now, what the travel time over the bridge is from different various routes from origin to destinations. And there's other information on historic and weekly and daily kind of travel time information to help people understand the differential from what their life was before to what it is now, and hopefully give them better tools to plan their daily travels. In addition to that, part of that team is working on the design of several plans right now in parallel that are aimed at reducing the congestion and creating faster travel times. Several of them are engineering solutions and construction solutions that we feel that we can put together rather quickly to help get additional relief while all of this other work is going on. At the same time, we're taking a look backwards. We've got a whole nother team of people taking a look backwards. Those folks' mission is to determine when and how those tension rods broke, why they broke, and what the probable causes of those breaks were. RIDOT has hired WJE, a firm that has performed forensic structural analysis on most of the major structural failures in the United States during the last 50 years. They are what we consider the top experts in the country to look back at this structure to help us all understand what happened. In addition to that, the governor has hired an additional firm to provide oversight to the results that our forensic engineers are providing. So we'll have two sets of eyes. In addition to the governor, the FHWA has committed engineers to review all the other two of those reports. So we will have 3 redundant reviews of a look backwards to determine what happened, when it happened, and what made it happen, and who would be responsible for it. The RIDOT will certainly share all of that information with you and the public, and we'll be ready to address those issues when the forensic analyses are completed and the various higher level reviews of those analyses issue their findings. In addition to looking back through the forensic lens. It's important, I think, at this point, also for us to look back a little further than that. Back in 2016, I was in this room, this very chair, right here, addressing the legislature on the enactment of a major infrastructure improvement program called Roadworks. We had the worst bridges in the country. You know, when I look back at that, we weren't just 50th out of 50th at that point. We were more like 70th out of 50 states at that point. Decades upon decades of neglect of our infrastructure resulted in over 500 or 27% of our bridges in Rhode Island. More than 1 out of every 4, almost 1 out of every 3 bridges you drive over daily were structurally deficient, many of them to the same level that the Washington Bridge is. And all of which, many of which, were of equal importance or more importance to the transport of people to and from where they have to get. At that time, we didn't even know the actual condition of any of the bridges. We knew vaguely, but we didn't have specific information on the condition of the bridges. There was no plan at all to address the problem. The can continuously got kicked down the road. There wasn't, by the way, even if we had a plan to fix them, there was no financial plan in place to fund it. The organizational structure at DOT was so ineffective and antiquated that at that time less than 50% of even the small number of projects they were doing, less than 50% got done on time, on budget. Some of them never saw the light of day. That's not true anymore. None of that is true anymore. With the enactment of Roadworks, you all gave us the mechanism, the funding, and the management changes, the ability to make management changes at DOT, to bring us from having, at that time in 2016, 27% of our bridges structurally deficient. Since then, in just 8 years, we have repaired 270 bridges with the funding that you made available to us and that the federal government made available. A total of $3.1 billion investment, not only fixing bridges, but also building an economy that grew jobs, good paying jobs here in the state. That's nearly 30 bridges a year that we fixed. That's more than the previous decades, in many previous decades, that we ever fixed. They were sitting there, deficient, not getting fixed, no plan to fix them. That's changed. So far, we've fixed 270 of those bridges, and our deficiency has gone from 27% down to 14%. And our commitment to you was that by the 10th year, in 2026, we will have those deficiencies down to less than 10%, and we're right on track of doing that. Right on track for meeting that commitment that we made to you, that if you gave us the funding and the means to be able to do this, we would get you to a point where less than 10% of our bridges would be structurally sufficient. That still leaves a long way to go. And many of the bridges in that inventory are as old and as structurally deficient as the ones that we fixed to date. We're no longer worse than the country. While we're not as high as I'd like to be in the rankings, we're off the bottom and we're working our way up. But as I said, we fixed more bridges in the last 8 years than this state is fixed in decades before that. Look, I'm truly sorry. I'm truly sorry for the difficulty that the people are experiencing every day in the state because of the Washington Bridge. I assure you that the people behind me from DOT are working every single day, sharing that frustration and anxiety, but at the same time, putting their shoulder into things that get this situation corrected quickly, expertly, and get the Washington Bridge improved back. Those of you here in the legislature that know me, you know that I do my best every day to be transparent and honest with you. And I have been. When I know that something that you and the people of this state need to know, I get out there, whether it's good or bad, and I tell it. I tell it to you all the time. I have for the last 8 years. Told you when we failed at things, and I've told you when we succeeded at things. Every time I've known something that has risen to the level where everyone else needs to know it, I've been out there saying it. I was the one that rang the bell 8 years ago that we had a hell of a problem we needed to fix. And working with all of you, we did. We put a fix in place. This bridge, out of the 300 that we fixed so far, where we found conditions that were not as severe as this one, but we're approaching that. This one's an anomaly. It's the one out of 300 that I am truly sorry for. I accept responsibility for this. I'm at the top of DOT. So in that spirit, I want to continue moving forward to get this bridge fixed. I have someone here from VHB that's going to give you a presentation on the work that we've been doing, this 24/7 work that I talked to you about, that is looking for the reasons it failed, how it failed, what the rest of the condition of the bridge is, and what is the scope of work that we're going to need to build a bridge here that's going to last decades and be safe for you. So I'm going to ask you to just listen to a brief presentation on kind of like the scope of the work that we've done.
Thank you, Mr. Alviti. Mr. Klein?
Good afternoon,
Please proceed.
and apologize if any of this is a little redundant with some of the presentation you've seen before, but hopefully the images will help as well. My name is Jeff Klein. I am VHB's Director of Transportation here in Providence. I live in Coventry, and while my daily commute to Providence isn't nearly as impacted by this bridge's closure as that of my coworkers or your constituents from the East Bay, I certainly sympathize with the frustrations of those commuting this corridor. I am a licensed professional engineer in Rhode Island with approximately 22 years of experience, primarily in structural engineering and engineering management. I've been asked to give an overview of the team currently working on the emergency efforts, describe the timeline of findings, and an overview of the ongoing assessment. The Barletta-Aetna Joint Venture Design-Build team was working on repairs to the westbound structure when the previously unknown issues were identified that precipitated this bridge's closure. After the bridge closure, RIDOT hired the same Barletta and Aetna Bridge Design-Build team working on the repair project to develop emergency repair details for this new issue. This team included VHB as the lead designer, supported by VHB's subconsultant VN, evaluating the post-tension beams that I'll explain later. AECOM is continuing to serve as RIDOT's owner's representative, and RIDOT hired Michael Baker International to inspect the bridge, BDI to perform the concrete testing, Consor for underwater inspection, and WJE to perform a forensic analysis. Separate from DOT, I understand the governor's office has hired McNary, Bergeron, and Johansson as an outside consultant. The Washington Bridge configuration is complex and unusual. The bridge consists of balanced and unbalanced cantilever spans supporting what are termed drop-in spans. Essentially, in balanced span locations, the cantilever spans in blue on the screen act as a seesaw and are balanced by the drop-in spans shown in orange on either side. In the unbalanced span configurations, the cantilever span relies on a series of what are called tie-downs, shown in red for stability. You may have heard the term pins. We use the term tie-downs. There are 2 tie-downs at each of the 6 beams in each unbalanced span, 12 total. Only the exterior 2 of those 12 tie-downs per span are exposed. The other 10 are encased in concrete. VHB inspectors were on site Friday, December 8th, as the director mentioned earlier, working from a painting access platform installed by Barletta Aetna Joint Venture to inspect the steel in an adjacent span. Inspectors noticed the broken tie-downs on the exterior of the bridge, notified RIDOT, and had a follow-up call with RIDOT's bridge group Friday afternoon. Over the weekend, VHB engineers reviewed the plans in further detail and developed an inspection plan for Monday the 11th. On Monday, December 11th, inspectors documented movement in 4 of the 6 beams at Pier 6 and in 2 of the 6 beams at Pier 7. VHB met with RIDOT on the 11th and described that the movement observed could be indicative of additional compromised tie-down connections that impact the bridge's stability. RIDOT closed the bridge that afternoon. Immediately following the closure, RIDOT requested the design-build team to begin working on repair detail design and mobilized an independent inspection team to assess the bridge in more detail. This design, to supplement the broken tie-downs with new tie-downs, was advanced with input from the design-build contractor. In the process of preparing for these repairs, additional access platforms were installed and additional defects were identified in the cantilever post-tension beams. Post-tension beams rely on internal post-tensioning cables for strength. These cables run through ducts that are filled with grout, and they are anchored through a bearing plate at each end of the beam. Between January 6th and 16th, new defects were identified. These defects included concrete section loss around the post-tensioning anchor zone, exposing the beam's bearing plate and anchorage heads, unsound concrete with cracking in the beam's web, voids beneath the post-tensioning bearing plate, and soft grout. All of these deficiencies could indicate reduced tension in these cables, resulting in internal loss of strength within the existing beams. RIDOT's testing consultant, BDI, is using a multi-phased approach that includes non-destructive testing to review the existing beams. The multicolored scan on the left has been overlaid on the beam on the right to show the location of the internal ducts containing the post-tensioning strands. The scanning identifies suspected areas of deficiencies that may be worth concrete sampling probes to understand their cause: poor concrete, voids, or poor grout conditions. VHB's subconsultant, VN, is performing an analysis of the existing beams based on the original plans. Given that the beam condition has changed since the original construction, VN then takes this field testing data from BDI to update their model. This calibrates their analysis to match current conditions. Continued testing is ongoing and being fed into VN's structural model. The results of the segment being analyzed will be provided to RIDOT by the end of this month.
All set, Mr. Klein? Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, gentlemen. So
Thank
if that
you.
concludes your presentations, I think now we'd like to open it up to the questions from the senators and the reps. I'm going to begin to my right with Vice Chair Julie Casimiro.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for being here today. This is a hot topic for all of us, as you know. I'm from North Kingstown. This affects my constituents daily, whether it's their business or their commute to work. My sister lives in Cohasset. It's doubled her drive time into East Providence. So this does affect the entire state, not just the East Bay, and I want to make sure we're clear with that. I do have a few questions. Most of them are for Director Alviti. Director, was December 11th at 2:24 the first time you were made aware of the potential closing of the I-195 West span?
Yes.
And where were you when you received the call from your staff, and why were you not informed earlier?
So I was at home. I was working from home. As you all found out later in the week as I appeared in public, I had a bronchial infection. So I was nursing that, but I was still working from home.
Is your mic on?
Oh, I'm sorry. So I was working from home, but as I said, as you all found out as the week progressed, I had a severe bronchial congestion or infection that I was home nursing that day, but I was working from home at that time. As soon as I received the call, I got back to the office. And for the next several days, worked from the office. I'm sorry, what was the follow-up on question?
Why were you not informed earlier?
Oh, so we have a standard operating procedure that was adopted from the Federal Highway Administration guidelines and federal law with regard to notification process of critical findings. While not absolutely perfect, it's the one that we've been working with for the last 8 years. It wasn't in place before that. We put this in place at the beginning of roadworks. And the Federal Highway Administration approved that plan. And it includes a progressive analysis of a finding of serious nature before it becomes a critical finding, and then immediately upon being found to be critical by a succession of notifications and analyses that take place, those findings are immediately conveyed to the director and me to the governor. And the folks at DOT followed that to a T. Now, I think the governor has said since then he feels that he should have been informed sooner. I would have liked to have been informed sooner when it was of a less critical nature. But this is a procedure that we have followed. It's worked and protected us. I think in this case it actually protected us from moving forward into one of those actual failure situations. But that doesn't mean that it's as good as it can be. And we've already started working with the governor and his staff and Joe Alman and my folks to create a kind of notification process that's, while the federal guidelines form a baseline form of critical notice, we'll be improving on that. And any recommendations, of course, that come from you all will be implementing.
Okay. There were a number of emails that were released by the media in the last week or so. Mm-hmm. Does DOT use an alternative form of electronic communication, something like Slack, that would account for the lack of emails that you were involved with?
I think the lack of emails that I was involved with is probably because I immediately reported back to DOT and surrounded myself and immersed myself in the discussions that were taking place on a minute-by-minute basis. I was in direct visual and physical contact with all of the people working on this on a minute-by-minute basis, which it pretty much precluded the need to converse by email. We were talking face-to-face, real time.
Okay, I do appreciate VHB being here today, but where are the people who have been working on this for the last 6 months, the last year, the last 18 months? Where are the people who have been involved in the inspections that got us here?
So we can make them available to you if you'd like. You have seen their reports. They have submitted their reports as they do to us on a regular basis. There were several of those companies involved in this. I think as a forensic analyses and the forensic structural studies that are being conducted, are not only looking at the structure itself and the causes for the failure, but they're also looking at the various reports that were submitted prior to and during this, in all of that time before that. And I expect in the report that we get from the forensic companies, they will help inform us too as to the responsibility of all of the companies that were involved.
My colleagues and I received a lot of information on Friday at 3 o'clock before Monday at 3 o'clock meeting.
Yes?
In fact, this is the file that we received.
Holy moly.
So how do you possibly expect us to go through here and look at these reports to find out who's accountable?
I assure you that the forensic analysis that's being done by an independent forensic team that none of us at DOT have spoken with except to engage them in the process are conducting their investigation independently. In addition to that, the governor hired an independent company to review that, and the Federal Highway Administration engineers, and now you learned that the Department of Justice are all looking at this. So we have layer upon layer upon layer of review of those documents that you're talking about that will provide us all with an understanding of where, if any place, some failure in communication and or reporting or responsibilities took place. And I assure you that whatever responsibilities are necessary will be held accountable.
I have one last question, and I don't think you're going to be able to answer it, but how could this become so critical so quickly? And I don't think you can answer it.
So I think I pretty much said that in my opening remarks. We don't know right now. Those are the answers that we're asking for in the forensic analyses that are taking place. This is an anomaly. We have had other bridges in the inventory of 300 that we fixed and several hundred that we're on a path to fix that have had similar kinds of conditions, but the nature of this particular bridge was an anomaly in the rest of them. And the fact that we actually had a critical finding that required closure of several lanes is an anomaly in that. And we hired these forensic investigators to be able to definitively tell us why and how. And we'll report that back to you, I assure you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Senator Lawson?
Thank you, Chairman McKinney, and thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. As a resident of East Providence, daily, I have the firsthand experience of the frustration of traveling the bridge, and as well as traveling in our community, which at times is often worse. This bridge closure has significantly impacted the quality of life in East Providence. And some of our concerns as members of the East Providence community is how decisions have been made and how they will be made that impact every part of our life. So I'm concerned about the path forward you mentioned, and that's really the focus of my questions. Mm-hmm. And as I raised in one of our meetings, our weekly East Bay legislative meetings, we need to make sure all the roads and bridges in Rhode Island are safe and that the public has confidence in those bridges, in the process. And when we make the final decision on the bridge, we need to be able to ensure that the process is transparent, was done with fidelity, and has the public's best interest in mind. So my question is, how do you envision sharing this process and communicating it with Rhode Island so they feel good about the decision and are confident to travel on this bridge?
This certainly is a great start. I have been actually wanting this to begin with all of you, because I think the questions that you have and the insight that you provide us at DOT from your personal experience in your district, where you live this on a daily basis and the people that you represent live it. I think this is a good forum. We've also begun through Joe Almond of the governor's office and all of government and municipal interaction that will, on a weekly basis and along with special meetings with the East Bay legislators that I've started to have on a weekly basis. We've had 2 or 3 of those meetings already, to continually provide you with an update as to what transpired during the last week in great detail and what our look forward to things, traffic changes, how the repairs, eventually when we get there, how the repairs are made. We'll be reporting out to you on a weekly basis. In between that, on a daily basis, we've established a new website that is www.washington-bridge.com that we're going to be using as a depository of various information, not only traffic, time of travel kinds of information, but also a daily or even hourly update on the newest information, the newest findings, the newest decisions on how to move forward will be posted for everybody to see on a daily and hourly basis. In addition to that, through some of the suggestions from our meetings with the legislators from the East Bay during the last week, we'll be creating a frequently asked question kind of information center where questions from all of your constituents can be readdressed on the website so that other people with similar questions can see and keep up with what the answers to those questions might be. And we've opened up our phone lines for person-to-person contact for people who want to voice a particular concern or emergency concern in their neighborhood, in their personal lives. In addition to that, we will be making decisions as we move forward. We'll be doing that in the same way we've done with most of the projects. You look at our projects, we have not only a community liaison group at DOT that continuously interacts with the local communities and their governments to make sure as we progress, the impact of the next steps that we do on them can be discussed and their ideas brought back into the design process. And we'll be doing that with this project. So it'll be a multi-pronged approach. We'll stay very much engaged with you all and the public on every decision that we make and remain absolutely transparent on that.
Thank you. I think it's vital that that's done because I think we have to have a defined process when we get to that point. But remaining on the future of the plans, since the closing of the bridge, I'm sure you've all had time to reflect on this process. And my question is, what have you learned and what would you have done differently in this process?
So, as I said, the processes that we had in place have served our purpose up until now, but they're not perfect. And we're going to continue to try and move toward that perfect place. We took a look at the inventory of additional complex bridges that we have. There are about 14 of them in the additional 200 or so bridges that we still have in poor condition. We took a closer look at those, and we will be setting up special procedures to not only monitor in a different way, but also report out in a very detailed way. The good news is that the majority of those are already in good or fair condition. They're not as far along as the Washington Bridge. So while they're complex structures like the Washington Bridge is, they're in a better state of repair, and we expect that they'll be safe. But we're giving them a higher level of detailed look on a continuous basis, and we'll probably, while the schedule of inspections prior to 8 years ago was sporadic at least and not consistent, we have now set up a process where every bridge in our inventory, particularly the ones in poor condition, are inspected every year. There are certain bridges among those where we may have additional interim inspections on certain components of those bridges. So we're getting a bit more granular with our approach to the way we inspect the bridges, to make sure that we have a longer lead time on the progression of any of these bridges so that we don't get into the same situation again. In addition to that, we've looked at a modification of our project selection process. Part of the roadworks legislation and part of what allowed us to fix so many bridges and bring ourselves so far along in the reduction of the number of structurally deficient bridges was adapting to an asset management kind of an approach. And that asset management approach applies another layer of maintenance at DOT to provide maintenance to the bridges that we're fixing so that we don't get into this infinite loop of getting back into the same situation 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years from now. That the investments that we're making now will be properly protected by new maintenance equipment and personnel that we have brought on board during the last several years. That will ensure that the bridges we're fixing now don't get into the same loop of decay and neglect that they did decades before we implemented these changes. We're looking at that and looking to improve that even more, particularly reflectively on what's happened here. The importance of that becomes paramount. And we'll be looking at that to increase those capabilities even further than we've already increased them.
Earlier, you mentioned in regards to the process that you wish you had been notified earlier, and I think the governor also referenced that. So I'm just wondering, in that process piece, has that policy change been instituted?
Yes.
Thank you.
Senator Zuria, please.
I'd like to defer at this time, please.
Representative Norrie?
Thank you, Chairwoman. Again, thank you all for being here today. A few quick questions. The timeline provided by DOT is labeled as a draft on the top. Is this the final copy, or is it just inadvertently?
So what you have is the final copy, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Second question. Director Alman, it's not reflected in the governor's timeline that his staff was informed of the December 11th, 2023 press conference, but it is in the DOT timeline. Was that just a discrepancy?
It's my understanding that the governor's comms people were notified. Hold on, I'm sorry. It's my understanding that the governor's communications office was notified that DOT was going to take press questions. They were not aware that there was going to be a formal conference.
Okay, perfect. And the governor did not attend the initial press conference, and that would explain why, correctly?
That's correct.
Okay, excellent. So back to Director Alviti. As Vice Chair Casimiro stated and pointed out, the reports are voluminous that we received, so I apologize if this data is being repeated or this question is being repeated. Can you please provide at some point this committee with a digital copy of all tie-down number 7 photos and the EXIF, the exchangeable image file format data that corresponds with each of the images? I would like to see when previous images of tie-down number 7 were taken and be able to show digitally the dates of those photos.
Absolutely. We'll provide you with any of that information that we have.
So I'm going off of tie-down number 7 that they talked about. That was so we're talking about, just so we're clear, right? I'm not asking for the incorrect data. So I'm talking about in this presentation, the fractured.
Yes.
This fraction. Perfect. Thank you.
Let me just assure you at this point, You don't have to be exact, because if you have follow-up questions, we're going to make ourselves available to every one of you to answer any additional questions that you have, even beyond the scope of this committee. And that goes for any legislators that have any questions. We will provide every document and every piece of information we have that you request.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure you will. It's an opportunity for me to ask something that has
Absolutely.
been on my mind since day one, so
Certainly.
thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Leader De La Cruz?
I just wanted to follow up with one of the questions that Representative Casimiro asked. She asked and did not receive a direct answer, which was, are there any alternative messaging systems that you use besides text, like Signal or Slack or Discord, to communicate any of the findings? Or
I'm not familiar with any of those other alternative methods that you just described. Maybe it's my lack of understanding of some of the technology, but look at me. I'm an old-fashioned kind of guy. I like to be told face-to-face, eye-to-eye when there are problems, and we do that at DOT. I'm there every day, sometimes every night, sometimes on weekends, many times on weekends. Integrating into the workforce and working with them shoulder to shoulder and discussing this on a minute-by-minute basis. That's the best form of communication that we have, and that's simply what takes place at DOT. I really, that accounts for the pace, us being able to build 30 bridges a year, 270 bridges in 8 years, I think comes in part from the way that we could communicate with each other on a continuous basis. And I encourage in any of the meetings that we have that all of DOT, all of the various aspects at DOT, sit in and listen to the decision-making process that we make on any important issues, even if it's unrelated to their division, so that everyone has an immediate situational awareness of everything that is going on. And that's why I can tell you without a doubt, this instant is an anomaly in the culture at DOT. It's an absolute one-off.
just one more, yeah. So I do have one more question. I think all of us have heard of the news story that came out of Florida. There's a Hurricane Ian, and a bridge was replaced in 3 days. I'm not saying that we need to replace a bridge in 3 days, but why does it take 2.5 months to gather findings about this bridge?
I assure you, anytime that we are able to implement rapid construction techniques, we've done that. You've seen us in the last 3 years replace bridges within 48 hours, entire bridge structures. Knock down the old one, move a new one in place, within 48 hours, traffic is back up and running. We've done that a number of times. We know that. That's in our wheelhouse, it's in our culture. It was never there before, but it's there now. Even in terms of the way we're accomplishing projects like 610 and the viaduct project, there are major components. While we're managing to keep traffic flowing on a bridge, at the same time, rebuild a bridge underneath the traffic while the traffic is flowing. So we have the knowledge set, we have the expertise, and we have the performance, the past performance that shows we are extremely capable of delivering bridge projects as fast as they possibly can. This bridge, as you heard the testimony before from VHB, is an extremely complex bridge, and it is unique in the inventory of bridges at DOT. The cantilever-type trusses, the post-tensioning in concrete that was implemented by engineers in 1968, makes this not only a difficult bridge to reconstruct or rebuild, but it also makes it more unique and difficult to analyze. Set aside from that, the attention that has been given to this problem, I am making damn sure that the analyses, the expertise of the companies that we have looking at this, and even if it means being a bit redundant in the amount of analysis and engineering expertise that we bring to bear on this, we're doing it. And if this bridge can be built in 2 weeks, we'll build it in 2 weeks. If it can't, we're going to be honest with you. We're going to tell you why. We're going to tell you the unique features of this that make it not possible. But we're also going to open up the solution on the speed at which it can be rebuilt to competition. Regardless of what the scope of the repairs that we make, we will be using the most advanced project delivery techniques such as design, build, or construction oversight. We will be implementing, along with FHWA and the experts that they have on loan to us, the fastest procurement process, the most effective and efficient delivery method, and the solutions that come from that competition between the design-build teams, I am sure will yield the most innovative approaches to get this thing rebuilt as quickly as possible. And the team that will win that will be the team that provides us with the best and quickest solution, I assure you.
Thank you, Senator. Rep. Donovan?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Director Alviti, for the weekly Zoom calls with the East Bay legislators. I share those notes on the meetings with my constituents whenever possible. And I'm going to switch gears a little bit. In light of the impending snowstorm, are there special plans for snow removal in the affected lanes? And will those available lanes be open on Wednesday for commuters? Yep. And most importantly, will it be safe?
Yes. In short, yes to all three. Even weeks ago, we worked with our maintenance division and the state police to put in place rapid deployment and special attention for emergency and snow removal kinds of operations for this section of the roadway. Our maintenance crews have special crews dedicated just to the clearing of the lanes with equipment that's necessary to make sure we can clean them effectively and quickly. So yes, we have the resources and we have a plan in place to do it quickly. With regard to this storm, we just had a briefing with the governor and the press. I'm not there for it right now, but my folks are sitting in on additional weather kinds of briefings. This is a tough storm that's coming. I'll tell you why. The total amount isn't tough. I mean, we've dealt with 6 to 12 inches or 18 inches before. That's not new to us. We're good at doing that. But this is going to come at a critical time of day. It's going to come midday, which will give people early in their commutes a false sense of security, that it's going to be okay, and then it's going to intensify midday into pretty much a whiteout condition that's not only going to make it difficult for people to drive in, but even for our own crews to stay ahead of. The intensities at which it's going to be falling, between 1 and 2, in some instances almost 3 inches per hour, are snowfall intensities that are difficult for our crews. Even with full implementation, I assure you we have all staff and trucks and vendors ready to go on this. But even with that full complement, the intensities that it's going to be falling during midday is going to make it difficult for us to keep ahead of it, particularly if there are additional vehicles either broken down or stalled on the roadways during that time. We have the equipment, we have the personnel. The timing of the storm, the intensity of the storm is going to create challenges, not just in this construction zone. It's going to create challenges statewide. Although we have particular attention to this, my concerns are, and my staff concerns are, on a consolidated, good plan on a statewide basis. We're expecting the snow to finish at about 7 o'clock tomorrow night. We expect to have all the roads cleared by midnight and ready for the commute on Monday morning. That's our mission. Weather changes. We can hope that it comes in less than expected, but we're preparing for it to come in worse. So all that I can say is stay tuned to the reports that the governor will be giving, and because his intention is to keep everybody informed as we get closer and even through the storm.
Will he encourage people to stay home, do you think? That the people that can stay home,
I
of
think,
course, yeah.
I think yes. I think the people will be hearing the weather reports and the reports from us and the advisories from us, and they'll make the correct decision. I have a lot of faith in that.
Thank you.
Representative Speakman.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I have a couple of questions, one about the past and one about the future. The one about the past refers to the org chart that you gave us that's titled Washington Bridge Team, and I guess this is about the present. So there's a yellow block that says McNary, Bergeron, and Johansson.
Yes.
That is the engineering firm that's been hired by the governor's office, is
That's
that
correct,
right?
yes.
Do they have any contracts with DOT at
No.
this point? Have they ever had contracts with DOT?
No, not to my knowledge. I don't know if they have.
Okay, thank you for that. And then at the top of the chart, there's, I guess it's brown box that has ACOM in it.
Yes.
That is the owner's representative?
Currently on the current design build team, they are the owner's representative on that contract, and we retained them temporarily to remain that way on the repairs that we're making to the pins.
Can you explain what that means to be an owner's representative, please?
Yes. Many times a design build contract has complexities involved that while our project managers and our construction engineers are working on the job on a daily basis, some more highly technical aspects of the project that's being proposed, because remember, on design build kind of projects, the design is progressing in concert with the construction. So design takes place, construction starts. For example, demolition can start while bridge components are being designed. That condenses the amount of time that it takes to do a project, because you're doing design and build at the same time, but it also increases the complexity of keeping track of how those decisions are being made. And while we have a very competent project management and construction engineering and bridge engineers at DOT, we typically on design build contracts also hire an owner's rep. We're the owner. They represent us in overseeing minute to minute any of the design changes that are, or designs that are being created, and how they'll work in construction. And they advise our three groups, project management, construction engineering, and they work in concert with us all to be able to make sure that we keep a good track of the progress of a project.
Thank you. So in that stack of documents that Vice Chair Casimiro showed you, I did the best I could to go through them, and there's a document that describes the July inspection.
Yes.
Which, if I read it correctly, which I may not, says that ACOM conducted that
yes.
inspection.
So we have a separate, apart from the contracts that we enter into with consultants to be our owner's rep, we have a separate, I think it's biannual, it's every couple of years that we go out and select several engineering companies that will provide engineering inspections on our bridges. They perform the inspections and produce the inspection reports. We hire several companies at the same time so that we can rotate those companies that we hired through our inventory, so that a different company every year is assessing a bridge. So we have different sets of eyes on it. AECOM is a very large company. a separate section of their company provides engineering inspections, and they were hired under that set of contracts to perform that, but it's a different group of engineers.
So in that inspection report, and again, I'm not an engineer, so I was trying to read it the best I could, it
Yep.
says that severe pigeon debris and construction debris restricted access and visibility.
Yep.
That troubles me a little bit. Does that mean that that firm that is now the owner's representative couldn't conduct a full inspection of the bridge that is now out of service?
No. We,
Good.
when we get those kinds of reports, for example, in the area where the pins actually broke, there was no pigeon debris.
Okay.
The mention of that was in another section of the bridge, and we have our maintenance crews, when we get those reports, go out and clean it. But that's a continuous process. I mean, we can clean that 2 or 3 times a year, but by the next time it's inspected, the pigeons have been back in there on a daily basis.
Yes.
So we try and stay ahead of it. But that particular debris that they're talking about did not obstruct the view or inspection of the components that failed.
That's good to know.
Yes.
Sort of. Thank you. And then my question about the future, I represent Warren. We're awaiting completion of 2 bridges that will carry bicycles and pedestrians,
Yes.
the Broken Bridge and the bike path bridges.
Yes.
And I guess my question is sort of related to that. What is the state doing to reduce the number of cars on the road, not just to mitigate traffic? Is RIDOT working with RIPTA, for example, to encourage the use of public transportation or carpooling? Are there any other approaches being considered to help reduce the number of cars that are moving over that bridge? And related to that, are there any incentive programs developed to try to encourage folks to use fewer cars to go over that bridge?
So far, I think you've seen us take a couple of approaches to help encourage alternative means of transportation. The first was the ferry. I was hoping for better results from that, but I'm sorry to say the push wasn't worth the shove. Not enough people made the mode shift in order for it to be economically feasible to continue. There were too few people taking advantage of that to make any difference at all on the volume of traffic that was on the roadways. But it was something that we knew we had to try, and we tried it. In addition to that, we have begun working with DEM and encouraged them, and at one point we even interceded and provided ourselves on snow clearing operations on the East Bay bike path itself. During the winter months, it goes largely unused, mainly because DEM doesn't plow it, and it becomes challenging for people that want to avail themselves to that mode of transportation to use it. So we implemented, I'm sorry, we implemented a snow plowing routine that will keep those bike paths clear to allow for that alternate mode to be used. I expect in the summer months it'll become more of an effective alternative than it has. We've had internal discussions about what we can do with RIPTA to increase the amount of rides and the frequency at which. We'll also be exploring if there are any federal funding, even through FHWA, that could be utilized to provide fare relief for people to encourage them to take transit. So exploring all of those modes.
Thank you. And I'd like to echo Rep. Donovan's comments about your staff and their responsiveness. Cynthia McCarthy in particular has been very responsive. I don't know if she's there, but
I'm sure she is with us, and I am extremely blessed to have what I consider the premier staff in all of government. I think other directors may take issue with that, but this team that we have, I mean, to build 270 bridges in 7 years, you don't get that without having many Cynthia McCarthys working shoulder to shoulder toward a common mission to do the public and common good. And these people are committed. They're really committed to doing that. And I thank you. Thank you for that observation.
thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you, Rep. Spigman. Committee Secretary Acosta, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. Director, if you'll pardon the crude metaphor, I was wading through the documents that your office sent, and I appreciate that. And I've been trying to parse out the difference between an inspection and maintenance. And so to use the example of a car, right, you would take a car to get inspected based on a schedule here that we have in the state of Rhode Island. But the maintenance itself is kind of separate. And the maintenance that you do to the car is sometimes based on what comes from the inspection, but sometimes separate. And so, as you described in your words, you mentioned that the can had been kicked down the road, and even if we had a plan to fix it, there was no budget prior to 2015. So from 2015 to the present day, or even 2016, could your office provide us or tell us within the documents that you sent us what the maintenance schedule was for this bridge specifically, the budget asks or requests for maintenance to this bridge specifically over that period versus how much has been appropriated, and how that is similar to or distinct from what, call it the manufacturer's suggested maintenance schedule for a bridge would have been. Understanding that, as you said before 2016, we maybe had nothing.
Yeah. I will try. It is difficult. The bridge maintenance unit, we've really put together during the last 5 or 6 years, right? And that has been evolving. We have bought new equipment that actually does washdowns of the undersides of bridges. We have new drainage clearing equipment that these folks use. We have new vehicles, and we have built a staff that never existed before to do that kind of maintenance. And they work hand in hand with our bridge engineering unit, who orders the inspections in the first place. I don't know that our work crews break down and identify the day they were at a particular bridge doing particular work. They're out there every day doing work on all of our bridges on a rotational basis. If there's a way for us to parse out from that, specifically the Washington Bridge component, I'll do that, get it to you. Either way, I'll report back to you what we can get you on that.
And going forward, because it seems to be connected to this broader roads work initiative that you were behind, can we expect to see a more sophisticated, call it, maintenance schedule for all of the large structures in our state?
Yes, you can bet on that. We have been providing more and more resources every year to build that capability, particularly as our investments get larger. In that, it becomes more important for us to simultaneously build a bigger maintenance capability to be able to protect that investment. And yes, we're doing that, and yes, we will, and that's a great observation.
Just a very small follow-up, if I may. As you contract out some of this work, and thank you for sending out all the the master price agreements that you've signed in leading up to this project, is there a component where the contractors themselves or the engineers give you a recommended list of work to be done on this project after it's completed by their staff?
Sometimes that happens, particularly on the bridges in our inventory that are in such poor condition. Sometimes this bridge was built in 1968. It didn't see the maintenance or construction light of day many times between then and now. So many times when we have these inspection reports that serve as the basis for us to create the scopes of work on the new projects that we're doing to repair them, many times during the course of those 300 bridges, we get into the construction. It's not unlike what any of you probably have experienced in your own houses when you call a contract to do work. They get into the walls, they find mold or whatever, right? Well, similarly with these older bridges, as we get into them and actually through the construction or rehabilitation process uncover the bridge to do the reconstruction, we find additional defects that we need to do. So recommendations come back to us and our project managers on the additional findings during construction that we need to modify the work being done in order to get corrected, because you don't want to leave that there, right? So that happens. That is commonplace not only with us but across the country in repairing these older bridges, although it's magnified here in Rhode Island because we have so many of them. And yes, we're continuously trying to improve our ability to know before we get into a project what's there, but that's a work in progress. I mean, okay?
Senator Lamountain, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Director, I have a question about the bridge itself. You said it was the bridge makeup dating back to 1968 was complex and unusual. How many other bridges that you know have the same design in the country?
In the country, I don't know in the country. I know here in Rhode Island, it's a one-off. We have other complex bridge structures. We've got about 14 of our inventory of 1,100 that have more complex components similar to some of the components in here, but not all together like this one. This one seems to have been the perfect storm of the 1968 engineers were implementing every new innovation that they could think of in the design and construction of this bridge. We have some of those that have been implemented, and it really did last a long time. It's just that it creates a challenge, more of a challenge than other bridges as they get to the end of their useful life.
Thank you.
Representative Agello?
Thank you. Thank you for your time today, and thank you for your work. I first want to get back to Representative Speakman's question about the pigeon detritus and construction debris, whether that was in the area that is of now concern regarding the bridge or not. I'm kind of concerned that the person charged with, or people charged with doing an inspection would note something like that, say that it was in their way, and then walk away not having really completed the inspection because there's something in the way.
Yes.
Is that common practice, or was it unusual?
I don't know. I will be finding out. The fact that it was in the way, although, let me clarify, the debris that was in the way was not in the way of inspection of the part of the bridge that failed. There was not a factor there. But the fact that it's presented concerns me, and that it may have been hiding something in that area of the bridge. It was not. Our folks go out, and particularly pigeon and seagull debris on some of our bridges. That is a challenge that has to be met by the new capabilities that we are purchasing and putting into place in the bridge maintenance crew. We now have equipment that we never had before that is actually an upside-down car washer that washes the underside of bridges, particularly the structural components of that kind of debris that you're talking about, that we never had before. Now, we don't have a lot of that. We're adding to our inventory of that kind of equipment to keep ahead of it. Also, with regard to that particular debris, I'm not sure on that particular location, but many times we'll go out there several times of the year, and every time we go out there, it's there again, because there's a constant presence of these birds out there redepositing the debris that we clean. So I'm not sure if that was a factor, but it is a concern of ours, and this report did highlight that, and we'll be looking more in depth as to how we can address that on the additional inventory of bridges we have.
Oh, thank you. That's good to hear, and perhaps inspections could be scheduled for right after one of those cleanings has been done. So
I agree.
So we'd be more thorough. A totally other issue then. I'm having trouble understanding how the state can enter into a design-build contract with and choosing the best and quickest solution when you've just said today that the design process is progressing.
Yes.
The bridge is being designed as it's being built. So What do we know about it being the best or the quickest solution if it hasn't been fully designed yet?
That's a great question. And that's a great question. The design-build process is an extremely efficient methodology on getting bridges rebuilt. And part of the initial assessment in which company we select starts with a baseline engineering design. In other words, we, prior to going to procurement for design-build, we hire an engineering company as our project advisors to do a base concept of the bridge design that we want implemented. So there's at least a 10 or 20% design document that is provided to these companies that says, this is the baseline design that we expect from you. But any additional innovations that you could see that you could implement to either improve, do it faster, cheaper, or better, include that in your proposal. So that while in the traditional way of doing things, we have one engineering company design it to their concept of how it can work, and another contractor come in and build that design. In the design-build process, we have an independent design that's ours, that says this is the base concept on which we're providing you with a base design on which for you to submit your proposal. But instead of just basing it on the lowest price, we're able to look at alternative designs that either our design engineer or a design engineer that was hired previously could have come up with. And now we have several teams that are working in concert, contractors and design-build teams, looking at it from a more comprehensive way and coming up with more innovative solutions than we could have conceived, or even the engineers that we hired to design these bridges would. So we are extremely pleased in the last several years, and this is a method of project delivery that comes highly recommended by the Federal Highway Administration and their experts. In fact, in our meeting this week with the administrator of the Federal Highway Administration, who came in from Washington, he and his engineers very much endorse this methodology and are looking forward to working with us on implementing those kinds of innovative strategies to get it built better, faster, cheaper.
Representative Carson?
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much to everyone. This has been a very informative conversation. Director, could you, you noted how many bridges DOT is responsible for. Could you say that again? How many bridges is DOT responsible for in the state of Rhode Island?
Major bridges, over 1,100.
Thank you. So I have another question. There's a few things that I've sort of jotted down while I've been here, right? So one is that you commented that there are layers of activity going on to uncover exactly what has happened here.
Yes.
We know that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 consulting firms, plus the governors, I think, that are working.
Yes.
To try to work on this.
Plus the FHWA.
Plus, I didn't get to that yet, but you're absolutely right.
Right.
They're in there too. We know that you didn't hear for 72 hours that there was a problem on the bridge. Is that correct?
Yes.
We also have read that some members of the staff at DOT are unhappy there. We've seen that in the Boston Globe last week. They've characterized it as a toxic atmosphere. And so my question is, managerially speaking, how is this whole thing hanging together? You have independent contractors working, you have the federal government, you have disgruntled employees, you have this governor's office working. What kind of confidence can you give to us that this mix of independent contractors employees, outside organizations, are really hanging together managerially on a plan that's efficient, timely, working quickly. How's that all working?
I'd say this. First and foremost, the results that it has created. In the decades before we put in this new project management kind of management, which, by the way, we were directed under Roadworks to implement at DOT. Roadworks actually said, implement project management strategies in the organization of DOT. We did that. We did it with the encouragement also of the Federal Highway Administration, which we looked around the country and we said, which organizations, which DOT organizations in the country are working most effectively? We asked that of the FHWA, and they identified one in the Midwest that had implemented the project management strategy that we did, or management structure in DOT. And they came in and they told us about the results of how they went from very low percentage of on-time, on-budget projects to a very high percentage. Last year, so when I talk about results, last year, the 100 or so projects that we did, or maybe even more than that, were 100% on time, on budget. We built more bridges in the last 8 years than in decades before. We built nearly 300 bridges. Not only bridges, but bike paths and train stations and other transit and multimodal kind of structures that we built. We rebuilt train stations across the state. In addition to rebuilding 300 bridges, we started a ferry system. We've made more positive changes with the team and the employees at DOT in this organization than they had for decades before. You don't do that if your entire workforce is dysfunctional or toxic.
Well,
I assure
have
you-
you ever had this many consultants working on one project before? I mean, there's 7 or 8 of them right here.
For the last 8 years, that is not uncommon, that we call in expertise from the outside to better inform us on how to move a project further ahead with better expertise. We have used all of the resources at our disposal to make sure that we're making the right decisions. And part of the project management function is to not only oversee the implementation and financing of a project, but also be responsible for the coordination of all of the engineering aspects of it. And the project manager kind of management structure, finally, for the first time in the history of DOT, eliminates a lot of the finger pointing that used to go on in construction projects, where the contractor would point at the design engineer, and the design engineer would point at the DOT staff, and the DOT staff would point back at the contractor, and around you go. We now have a centralized project management where a separate group of project management is responsible from absolute beginning of the project all the way to the end for every aspect, including community kinds of interactions with legislators and people who have concern about projects. It's all encompassing. That kind of comprehensive management of projects has allowed us not only to complete the work on time and on budget. Last year, as I said, the result is 100%. And what I submit to you is you don't get to 100% on time, on budget, and you don't get to constructing 270 bridges in 8 years with a toxic work environment. Quite the contrary. What I have found at DOT is a group of highly professional, highly motivated, and very happy people. I'm going to use this anecdotal example. An engineer who has been with DOT for 30 years before I ever got there retired a little while ago. And he said to me, I have never worked harder in all of my 30 years at DOT than I have in the last 8 years, but I've never been happier in the contribution that I've made to the organization. And that same kind of culture is one that I have seen reflected throughout every part of DOT and every employee. Now, there are a few employees that resisted these changes that we have implemented. Yes. I will tell you they're very few, and sometimes maybe even the top part of the management structure of their various unions. But the changes that we have made have created a very healthy, happy, and extremely productive workforce at DOT, the likes of which, you see in people like Cynthia, who is your legislative liaison. I don't think she's ever worked harder. She's been with DOT before I ever got there. But she works harder now, I think, than she ever has. But she does it well, and she does it effectively, and she's happy doing it. I know she is. And I see that reflected. And I wouldn't let some of the more recent reports that are out reflect the entire workforce. I assure you it does not.
I was concerned about how they all integrate, how well. I mean, there's definitely a whole lot of different players at this table,
there are a lot of moving
right?
parts,
And that's a challenge to get them to collaborate and all move in the same direction. I think that's a fair question.
Yes, it absolutely is. I think from the outside, when you see this many moving parts in an agency, it is complex. But the management structure that we put in place has controlled that to the point of we're extremely successful now in doing things in a very accurate, precise, and professional manner that the results talk for themselves. If you just look, we produce monthly reports that anybody can go on our website and look at, and it has to do with the performance of every single project, whether it's on time, on budget, and to scope. And you can inspect that whenever you want. It's open to the public and the press and everybody else. And we've done that for the last 8 years. Every single quarter, we publish one of those. And I think the success of keeping all of those moving parts are reflected in those reports and the results that we provide.
Thank you, Rep. Senator Oyer.
Thank you, Chairman, Chairwoman. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. I think one of the biggest questions that Rhode Islanders have right now is also about traffic. And to put it very concisely, is the traffic issue that we see now going to be what we are seeing until the construction is finished, whether it's a full replacement, whether it's a rebuild of some components?
Yeah.
What are we doing around traffic? I know you talked a little bit about this and the collaboration you're doing.
Yep.
No secret, I represent Newport and Jamestown.
Yes.
We feel it down there.
Yep.
It affects the Pell Bridge. We're going through our
does.
own maintenance structure down there,
Yep.
our maintenance projects down there. Just got the notice about the Mount Hope Bridge, which also requires maintenance, which is going to require lane closures.
Right.
So all of those things, the cascading effect throughout the state, if we're looking at a multi-year rebuild and replacement,
Yep.
what does that look like? What's being done? How are you coordinating with those other agencies?
I wish I could sit here right now and give you all of those answers, because I would in a heartbeat. But I have no doubt that I know that our engineers, along with some of the experts that we currently have on board, who won't necessarily be the ones that are building it, but the ones that we called in to help us solve the immediate problem, there are short-term kind of corrections that we think we can put in place that's going to relieve a lot of the pressure of this existing. We're looking at additional lanes of travel. We're looking at expanding some of the infrastructure marginally so that we could get additional capacity through. We're looking at geometry changes. Those are the things I think I can promise you in the short term that we're in design now and will be implementing in the short term. 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months, right? During the actual construction of whatever we're going to do, part of the design-build competition, and depending upon the project, different components of a project become more important in the scoring structure and our selection of the companies that are going to do the work. I can assure you, very high up on the list of things that these companies are going to be scored on will be the approach that they provide to us in traffic mitigation while the construction projects. We found on several design builds that we've done, the concept that we had going into the procurement process of how traffic would be managed during construction was blown completely away by some of the innovations that some of these companies have provided us to build literally 300 bridges in 8 years under the wheels of the people that are traveling on them. And we have had some traffic mishaps, but when you consider the volume of projects that we did, the number of major impacts that we've provided have been relatively few. They're chronic, and everybody complains about them, certainly, but the innovative kind of approaches that these design build teams provide us in the competitions when they're looking for innovative ways of solving them have helped us get a lot of these projects built with minimal disruption. We're going to be looking for that same kind of company to do the construction of whatever we have to do. And the traffic mitigation will be a major component of the scoring and the selection of those companies.
Thank you for that response. And then more specifically on, I know the Bridge and Turnpike Authority, you know, the Mount Hope Bridge, they issued that schedule about what that, the timing of that would be, about the lane closures, trying to limit the disruption during high traffic hours and rush hours.
Yes.
And I know that the Pell Bridge, so are you coordinating and communicating with the Bridge and Turnpike Authority?
Absolutely. I sit on that board. But more than that, our traffic engineers are engaged with them on a daily, weekly basis to make sure we have cross-agency communications and coordination going.
Thank you. And I'd also like you to encourage to not give up on the alternative transportation. I heard a lot of feedback on the ferry issue. I mean, that was over the holidays. There was limited, you know, and so I think that there are, you know, folks, when they're looking at those alternative transportation, they need to make sure that it has a consistent schedule, that it's a reliable schedule, that they understand on the end and both ends that they're going to be able to get back to their car, their house, that they're going to be able to get to their office. And without that consistent schedule, and folks need time to adapt to. So so I would encourage folks to continue to look at the alternative transportation and how that can be integrated into the overall plans.
I will. I promise you I will.
Thank you. And then a follow-up on the design build. Representative Agello and I were actually talking about that, and you raised the point about the on time, on budget, and we're curious if you could give us some additional information about how that budgeting happens given the design build mechanism. How can you understand or know upfront what your budget is going to look like if at the front end of the project you kind of don't know what the project scope is going to be?
We actually have a pretty good understanding of the scope going in. Sometimes we get scope creep during the project if we find additional defects that need to be, but in hindsight, when we look at the projects that we did have a budget for, and then we went out to design build, I'm not going to say for sure, I'll have our folks report it out to you, but I have a sense that our design build projects were among those that stayed closer to on budget, on time than any other projects that we do. I'll get the data for you. We have it. Appreciate it. You bet.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Basilian.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And welcome.
Director, how are you tonight?
Very, very well, thank you.
Rhode Island's poor infrastructure hasn't been a secret, as you noted. I think there were more than a few of us in the room who were there in East Providence back in 2016 with now President Biden, who remarked that the overpass looked like it was being held up by Lincoln logs, if I remember correctly.
It was, yeah.
And earlier in the night, you had mentioned that some bridges have also had to be replaced at almost a moment's notice, if you will, shut down, and then a plan for remediation. I'm wondering, obviously, in terms of scale, this is probably the biggest failure that you've dealt with in terms of structural integrity. But have there been other structural failures like this that you've dealt with, and the protocols that were followed for closing the bridge, were they the same during that weekend in December as previously followed for other closures?
Yeah. So no, none of them approach the severity or abruptness of this finding. Any of the other times where we've had serious findings usually happened during the construction, where we uncovered things that were maybe worse than what we originally saw. But they were the kind of structural elements and the kind of construction that we could almost immediately, and when I say immediately, within hours, implement additional reinforcement to protect the structure and the people traveling over it without having to close it down and or divert traffic. Any of the diversions that you've seen us do were usually related to constructability. We wanted to do a rapid construction and move a bridge in as a whole, and we actually had to close a highway down for a period of maybe 48 hours to do that. But we've never had a critical finding of the nature of this one and the kind and the placement that provided us with the urgency that this one did. All of the others we've been able to meet as part of the construction project that we're already doing. We just continued through the project, made temporary repairs to get the keep the construction moving forward, and did it without any kind of major disruption.
To piggyback on my colleague Senator LaMountain's question about the unique design of this build, 1968 was a bad year for American politics. Maybe it was also a bad year for bridge designers. But
that's an interesting observation. It's not one that I don't think.
From what I've heard on both.
Yeah, right. It was.
What can you say to Rhode Islanders who maybe are particularly concerned? They know about Rhode Island's aging infrastructure.
Yeah.
Certainly, this wasn't the only bridge that was built during that time that Rhode Islanders are still traveling over. What can you do to reassure Rhode Islanders that maybe more inspections have taken place regarding infrastructure of that era, or maybe we can be on our front foot and start addressing that moving forward? Maybe it's just the time horizon, whether it's not necessarily the design, but the materials used, or the project managers used, or the vendors that were used at that time to ensure the integrity of similarly built, or at least during that area, infrastructure.
A simple answer to that would be all of those things. And a truthful answer is all of those things. There are things that we're working on at various parts of the way that we inspect, design, build, and maintain our unit that, while we made major steps in a positive direction as a result of roadworks during the last 8 years, it's not, we've got a long way to go to move us to perfect, right? And the culture that we build and the management structure that we built continues to feed back the kind of information we get from every project back into our kind of experience level going forward. So this is a big lesson. But there have been other smaller lessons that have significant impact on the way we've modified our methodologies and our delivery at DOT, even in terms of planning our finances and planning selection process. The asset management process has been refined now to contain carbon neutral kinds of assessments and other aspects that never existed there before. We're continuously improving that. We're like a company that's continually trying to make its product better. And that's happening every day at DOT. Every project, we have a loop back lessons learned that feeds into the process going forward to allow us to make improvements. In this case, I think the biggest impacts that you'll see will be in the inspection methodologies, the early detection and early warning systems that we put in place, but also in the long-term constructability and maintenance aspects of what we're doing. We have made big progress. We've cut down considerably the number of bridges like this one that have been in our inventory. We've got a way to go. I think the other lesson learned is it's not time to take our foot off the pedal. It's time to accelerate. Although we've come a long way and we're going to have us to less than 10% structurally deficient bridges. And that sounds like a great achievement. And it is. I'm not going to detract from the work that the folks there are doing in my agency. going from 27% structurally deficient bridges down to 14 in 10 years is a major step forward. That 10% that we're reaching is still more than half of the states in the country have. There are some states with 0 and less than 5%. So just when we approach and achieve the mission of the Roadworks initiative, it's not going to be a time to take our foot off the pedal and relax and say, we did it, look, we're here. There's still a long way to go to get even into the mainstream of the rest of America. That gets us to 10%, but we got to get to 5 and 4 and 3, 2. We got to get to 0 eventually, and we can. I think we have the construct and management structure at DOT and the finance and grant finding ability to be able to carry us forward. But that takes considerable amount of effort, not only by us, but also for all of you in the legislature, to not become complacent again and to back off on the investments that we've been making. It's time to finish the investments off and continue making them.
I would just say that certainly a lot of work has been done. Certainly there's a lot more to go.
Yes.
Particularly in my district, I know a lot of work has been done on 95 North and, or by the mall. I would just hope that whatever empirical evidence that we've garnered through this failure is taken into account during that continuous improvement process.
Absolutely.
Not just whether it was the design, obviously we know that's deficient at this point, but the types of materials used, who did the work back in 1968, all that stuff. So.
I assure you it is. It's a continuous feedback loop that we have of lessons learned.
Right. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Senator. Rep. Falella.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here this evening. What was the expected life expectancy of that bridge span before the broken pins were discovered?
I believe it was 60 years, 55, 60 years.
And since we have similar bridges that may be complex in design, have those bridges been recently inspected?
Yes.
Good.
Yes. Certainly, not only are we re-inspecting them, but we're putting into place right now more complex kinds of active kind of monitoring of those bridge structures, where we're even looking at employing some higher technology stress gauges and that will provide us a kind of dashboard back at DOT to monitor them on a real-time basis, like a minute-to-minute basis instead of a year-to-year basis. So, yeah, we're making those improvements right now.
Leader Chippendale?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen. I'd like to talk about inspection protocol and document integrity. And Mr. Klein, I'm going to start with you. First, I'm not a professional engineer, so if I screw up any terminology or acronyms or whatever, I preemptively beg your pardon and feel free to correct me.
So 2 of the 3 of us up here are professional engineers, so
fantastic.
Let us help you.
We've determined already through questioning that VHB, you've hired the third-party inspection outfit, or okay.
No, sorry. Sorry, VHB hasn't hired the inspectors. The inspectors are working separately under a contract with RIDOT directly.
Do those inspectors send their reports to you, or do they send them to the client?
The inspection reports that are ongoing right now are being sent to both simultaneously.
So you get them as well as DOT?
The ones that are happening since the closure, yes.
And
okay,
the Federal Highway Administration also.
So prior to that, not everyone was getting them.
Prior to that, the protocol is that the inspection reports go to RIDOT.
And to Federal Highway Administration.
Yes.
Okay. This is something that we've all come to know, this format of the report, right? With these photos and the details that are on them. They've been going around for quite some time. Right. Document integrity. It was noted, I think, early on by folks that there were some misalignments, some text things that were out of whack.
Yeah.
Is that something?
Yeah, I
you
saw them,
haven't
but,
had?
the explanation was that if there were corrections, they were corrections to make it correct.
Okay. So first, I'm going to add to Rep. Naray's request as far as looking for the original photos on tie-down 7. I would like to request all the original photos for all of the reports in question, as well as the inspection reports from the inspectors on the ground.
Sure.
We have some inconsistencies in the photos where people were pointing out the dates are manipulated. You can see that there's 2 different typefaces used. They're at a different level, et cetera, et cetera. That calls into question if anything in the report can be relied on.
No, it does not.
Oh,
I think that's
it certainly does to me.
I think that's a reflection of maybe the poor editing capabilities of whoever made the edit to it. I don't know. I don't know if it means anything more. Whatever information on it, I believe whatever information, however it was made, was accurate and correct.
Okay, then why over these 4 years or this period with 4 different inspection companies do we have reports that have the exact same verbiage, including spelling errors, the exact same dates underneath on photos? Why is that happening if this original information is getting to DOT? Why are we seeing the same verbiage used?
I asked that same question.
So now I'm asking it, so hopefully I'll get an answer.
So the answer is this. The reports themselves and the format of them, and even the system that's used for reporting, was developed from an AASHTO standard. It's a national standard of bridge reports, with the review and approval of the Federal Highway Administration. So these are the way we're going to report on it. This is the method we're going to use. Part of that reporting process is a system that these companies go on as a central depository for their inspection reports. And there are some fields of information that they fill in that are pre-populated with some of the original information, so that if no change is in place, that text, even though the contractor and the engineering consultant that's performing it is a different contractor, they're using a pre-formatted text that they just leave in place if the condition they find is the same as the one that pre-existed. Follow me?
I'm following.
So I think that's the explanation that I got of why some of those fields of information appear to be the same, even if there was a misspelling from year to year, because there was no change in that particular aspect of that bridge inspection. Therefore, the next company populating those forms left that data the way it was.
Great. So when we get the original stuff, we'll be able to see if that consistency remains. I'm going to go directly to Mr. Klein. Span 7, when it was inspected by AACOM in July, was that the company who did that inspection?
The July inspection was done by AACOM.
It was,
yes.
okay. Did you get the original materials from the inspector, or did it go to both you guys, the DOT as well as VHB?
I'm not sure what you mean by original materials.
The photos, the reports, the findings, anything that was noteworthy.
The inspection reports were provided to us, but they were provided to RIDOT first. So we received them, I believe, after the closure.
Did you get the RIDOT version of the report, or did you get the report from the actual person who inspected it?
It would have been the
There is, let me
Director, I'm speaking to the engineer, please.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd have to look back at what we received, but I believe it was the final version. I don't think we have anything.
So you don't you have what DOT had provided us with?
I would assume so.
Okay,
let me just add to that. The reports that we provided you with are the reports that we get. They're not altered in any way. They're not edited by DOT staff.
Director, all due respect, you just told me that 4 different companies that made these reports copy and pasted information.
Correct, but that's them. That's not us at DOT. We
So
don't
DOT
alter the
isn't-
reports in any way.
Excellent.
They fill in the reports. They fill in the reports. They provide them to us. We review them. Federal Highway Administration reviews them. If there are any corrections that need to be made, Federal Highway, we comment back to the company. They make whatever changes has to be made to make the corrections, not us.
To this form? This
To
format?
those forms.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. Again, Mr. Klein, per industry best practices, what is the standard physical distance an inspector must be from the object or area he's inspecting?
My scope on the project is design. I can't comment on what the inspection protocols are for
Okay,
the contract.
further confirming, we definitely need inspectors here.
We can report back to you on what the proper distance is.
That would be great, and we can ask the inspectors when they come in front of us. During the July inspection by AECom, was there physical access either on staging or through a boom truck or some sort of a physical lift for the inspectors when they made that inspection?
That would be a question for the inspectors.
Does the administration know?
Yes, they use lifts from the barges below. They use catwalks and whatever access is on the bridge itself.
And they were employed in that July inspection. They were used. They were actually physically able to get up and view the
I
areas.
don't know. I don't have a firsthand knowledge of what they use, but yes, they use various kinds of lifts and supports to get them in a position to inspect the bridges.
Would it be appropriate for them to use a drone instead?
I don't know. I suppose so.
That would be in keeping with best industry practices for a drone to inspect rather than a person?
No, I don't know that one or the other. I think we prefer and we have them inspected eyes on, so that a human is directly there looking at it and can touch it, feel it, or interact with it in a way.
Okay, okay. Have you ever requested or have any reports ever been delivered to you orally to the department, as opposed to in written form?
Inspections?
Yes, any reports, any reporting from someone you paid to do an inspection, have they ever orally communicated the information as opposed to a written document?
Not to me. I
To
could sit here
DOT.
and say,
I don't wanna
have
parse
no-
words
I have
here.
no knowledge of whether or not anybody's communicated orally any inspection results to any members of my staff. I have 700 people that work for me, and they talk to people all the time, and I'm not privy to every conversation, but I can ask.
Okay.
I can ask.
Yes, and I would appreciate that. Mr. Klein, at any point prior to the July inspection, were you made aware of any structural deficiencies or load limits that should have been placed on that span of bridge?
Can you repeat the question?
Prior to the July inspection?
Yeah.
Were you ever made aware of any structural deficiencies or load limitations that needed to be placed on that bridge?
No.
Was the administration?
Load limitations?
Any load limitations or structural issues with the bridge?
We have made no load limitations on that bridge.
I know we
Except
haven't. I'm asking were any
Except for a
recommended?
ramp that was on it. I think the ramp coming onto the bridge from Veterans Memorial Parkway had a load limitation associated with it.
I'm talking about the area that we're all here today to talk about.
Not to my knowledge, no.
There were never any load limitations or concerns about?
We did not
Okay.
place a load limitation on that portion of the bridge, no.
I have a document, I believe it is from VHB, or it's part of their team from February of '23 that does indicate that there are load restrictions and over.
Like a copy of that document.
I'm happy to provide you with copies of the documents. So there's a lot of inconsistency that just a dope like me can find by
Well,
talking
it
to
depends
people and
on what
reading
that
documents.
document says, whether or not there's an inconsistency.
I can provide you with the
Thank you very
documents.
much. Thank you.
But all of this is going to the lack of faith, frankly, that the best practices had been employed up to this point, which led us to where we are.
Well, best practices were employed, but the best practices available to us aren't perfect. And they're not necessarily as good as we could potentially make them, but they certainly have served the purpose of keeping people alive through a difficult process of fixing 27% of our bridges that got structurally deficient from decades of prior
I stipulate that you
neglect.
have fixed a lot of bridges, Director. We've all heard it repeatedly. You don't have to keep reminding us.
Well,
It's chewing up a lot of time here.
Fact.
Understood.
That's an
Understood.
important fact.
And you've stated it repeatedly. We stipulate.
And depending upon what that document says that you're holding, which I don't know because I've never seen it, I'll certainly look at it and we'll investigate what it says and what it actually means. But it, to me, right here, sitting right now, does not prove to me one way or another without seeing it or knowing what it says, whether or not there were any deficiencies in the way that our folks have acted. But I'll certainly take it into consideration when we're looking at that. And if it did, I assure you that whatever inadequacies exist will be addressed.
So the question is, and you did state that it's not a perfect process. Nothing's perfect, though.
Right.
That's certainly understood. However, it's not even good enough to stop this from happening. The practices we're employing weren't good enough to prevent this from happening.
Stating
This
the obvious. We know
economically
that. Yes.
crippling event.
Yes.
So to say it's not perfect is a truism.
Right.
To shade it any other way, I think, is a little gratuitous. I'm going to defer from this point because I have a lot more questions, but I want everyone else to ask theirs. And I thank you for your responses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Chippendale. Senator Tokoyan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen. And before I begin, I'd also like to echo my colleague, Rep. Speakman's accolades of Cynthia McCarthy. She's very accessible, transparent, and I appreciate all the work she does and your staff.
We appreciate her too, I assure you.
I just have two questions, and keeping in the theme of the past and the future. My first question is for you, Mr. Klein. All the documents that I've been afforded, today at this hearing detail a course of action that's occurred between December 8th and December 15th. And I must confess, I did my best to cull through the documents that Rep. Casimiro described, but they were voluminous. So if my question is included in there, I apologize. So my question is, when was the last time the tie downs or the pins, if you will, at Pier 6 and 7 were inspected, and what was the condition of those pins at that time? Now, I've heard the time frame of July. Was that the time that they were inspected? And I understand that you could only look at the two external ones.
Yeah, I can't speak to when they were inspected, other than the information that was provided related to the July date. We weren't involved in that inspection. Our first time looking at the pins or the tie rods was that week of December 8th.
Okay, thank you. And to the future director, if you would indulge me, due to the critical condition of the Washington Bridge and the resources that it will require to either replace or rebuild it, how will that affect capital projects in the FY24 budget going forward that have already been in place? And for example, I could think of one at the top of my head, Douglas Pike and Route
Yes.
7, all the way from Providence to Burrville. That's a huge project. Is the impact of the Washington Bridge, will that have an adverse effect on those projects already budgeted for?
I believe not. One of the great things that people at DOT have done in creating the 10-year plan that you've heard me talk about so many times is being able to create revenue streams, rather funding streams, unique to every project, so that not only once we engage in doing the project, we get it done on time, on budget, but from when we plan it and put it on the 10-year plan, it actually gets done on time, on budget. The funding for this and the new strategies that we need to put in place to account for whatever the additional costs are already being worked on by our finance folks to find unique and individual funding mechanisms that will fund that endeavor, not affecting the rest of our infrastructure. The rest of our projects are too important. We can't let them get to a point where they may present similar problems to this one, right? So we're very much on track with maintaining the flow of every one of hundreds of other projects that we've got going. Part of our ability to do that came with the IIJA, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. Part of that came from the work that Joe Almond and I are working on, and the governor's working on, with our congressional delegation to create a new funding mechanism from the federal government that can be dedicated to this project, and we've already initiated that. And other efforts are being made in our finance division to look at other kinds of opportunities of funding that are available to us that will give a unique, dedicated funding mechanism to this. Critical component of that is going to be an ask of the legislature to provide just the 20% share of that, not 100%. You know that our federal funds come to us on an 80-20 share. But whatever that is, we will try to make that work with our existing resources. But if we have to come to you, that's kind of like us. We'll be asking you to put your shoulder in for the 20% of the project, but it's a small price to pay thing.
I asked my question because, the term kicking the can down the road, I understand that the Washington Bridge is critical and takes precedent. However, I was just concerned about the other projects that are in the pipeline across the state of Rhode Island. I just wanted to make sure they weren't adversely affected.
It's our intention to keep all of those going on time, on budget.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Rep. Solomon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it a requirement that the load rating be posted on the bridges?
Not if there's no posting for definitive bridges. I think there's a standard amount. If there are no limits on weight limitations, then I don't know that they're actually posted. I'll check and we'll report back to you. But I believe any of the bridges that do not have a weight limitation are not posted. But I'll check and I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, so prior to December 2023, when was the last time the load rating had been posted for the Washington Bridge?
I don't believe we've ever had to post a load limitation on the Washington Bridge.
Okay. Was it ever recommended that a load limitation be posted on the bridge?
I've asked my engineers that. They're not aware of any recommendations that came to them for posting the bridge to less than what its capacity is.
Okay, I'm going to ask the same question to Jeff. Jeff, are you aware of any load limiting, load posting requirements?
I'm not familiar with it, no.
Okay, how about for this particular bridge? Have you heard of it being requested that a load be posted for this bridge?
Formally, no.
How about informally?
I know we submitted an RFI. It may have been tied to what the representative was describing, that asked for clarification on the load rating criteria. That RFI was still pending.
Okay, so what type of clarification was necessary?
We had done, not we, our sub-consultant VN had done an analysis, and it was still preliminary in nature, but they were getting different results.
Okay, had they questioned potentially the previous calculations of loads?
I can't speak to the details of it.
Why can't you speak to the details of it?
It was their analysis.
Okay. But you did read the analysis, correct?
It's been a while.
But you had read it?
I don't think I've read their analysis, no. I mean, I was part of the correspondence.
Okay. Just for clarification purposes, because I know there's been a lot in the media about NDAs being signed. Were any NDAs signed in regard to this particular project?
We've never signed, nobody at DOT has ever signed an NDA.
Okay. How about any contractors?
Not to my knowledge. NDAs are not required by anyone at DOT or our contractors. What we do require are confidentiality forms to be signed. And the reason for that is it's not a policy of DOT, it's a policy of Department of Administration and the procurement of projects. You don't want, during the analysis of a competitive bid or a competition for a design-build contract, we don't want employees who are reviewing those and assessing those handing out information to competitors to give them unfair advantages. So people participating in that procurement process, a procurement process only, are required to sign confidentiality, not non-disclosure, confidentiality, which basically says, don't tell the competitors what their competition is doing or pricing the project at, because that is a conflict of interest. Also, in the conflict of interest is the employee stating that they have no financial or other kind of personal ties to any of the contractors that they're doing the assessment of, which would give an unfair advantage if they favored one over the other, right? So the employees who are only the employees participating in the procurement process and part of the decision-making and scoring of the companies are asked to sign a confidentiality agreement that keeps intact the integrity and honesty of the procurement process. Outside of that, in terms of any of the work that we do or any of the discussions that we have or any of the correspondence that we do, there is no NDA or confidential agreement signed by anyone at DOT or contractors.
Okay, so getting back, so there was never any concern as to the tension tie capacity being significantly overestimated?
The tension tie rod?
Correct.
No, this is the first instance of this.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that's a testimony being told today. And my just final question here today is, I just want to talk about the elephant in the room. I know there's a lot of...
By the way, if you have any correspondence in that nature, it would be helpful if you provided it to us so that we could make it part of our forensic and provide it to the forensic analysis team.
Absolutely.
So that they can help determine what some of the problems are here.
Absolutely, I'd be happy to.
Great.
But just kind of going back to the elephant in the room, because I know a lot of the testimony here today has been talked about and about the bridge with 20% match, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the people of the state of Rhode Island want to know, one way or another, definitively, is the bridge coming down? So yeah, I'm going to ask that question.
I want to know that too. I want to know that as much or more than anyone in the state does. And the information that we'll be getting in the next several weeks from these 7 companies that we have defining the scope will actually provide us the information decisively that say, this is the scope of the work that needs to be done to create the new bridge that will carry people safely for a long time. And that will, the information we'll be getting will determine that. We'll give you the answer to that.
Thank you.
Senator Rogers, I'm going to start with you and move inward.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate you coming here today. Let me first start by saying there was definitely some type of something that failed. And how we address that in the future so it doesn't happen again, I think it's the most important part about having these oversight hearings.
Yes,
And not to point the blame, not to do anything like that, but how do we find out what failed and what corrective action we can make so it doesn't happen again?
I agree.
It's lucky, we're lucky apparently, that nobody got hurt and the bridge got shut down. That being said, I find some things that are concerning. I deal with a lot of bridge reports in my career, not as many as you, but for the most part, I get reports and I'll review them, and a lot of it's just general maintenance. But as these bridges continue to get in deteriorated conditions through these inspections, it's commonly you start, there is no weight load restrictions until you hit a certain point where the vehicles on the roads have to be restricted from that. And that's when you start dropping the weight loads on these bridges.
Right.
And some of them are not as important as this. They take a few years to get in the pipeline, and that weight load continues to drop. And sometimes when you get some, I see one in Gloucester where it gets so bad that they restrict travel. They bring it down to one lane or put a stop sign either side until they can get it fixed. I don't think I've ever really seen anything as fast and as sudden as this, and that's what confuses me. And again, I understand the type of style of this bridge is not different. It's much different than an I-beam or a box beam bridge with piers. Just looking at it, it's scary that they cantilever over and they V-pocket on pressed concrete with, I'm sure, cable going through them. You would think that it wouldn't stand the pressure by looking at the prints the way they're set up. But at the end of the day, I'm like, for example, when I look at photo 4 on Pier 7, where you see that break, I've done a lot of welding in my lifetime. I've worked with a lot of steel. That's not a sudden break, because a sudden break would show shiny spots where it actually broke, or you'll see a partial rust where it had been infected for a little while till it hit a sudden moment where it broke. That's an old break. That's not a recent break. And that brings me back to the inspections. If we did check them in July, we were told that this is visible. This pin is visibly on the end where you can actually go up and see it. So I'd like to see the reports that, on the end one.
You have a photo showing, you have a photo in July that showed the pin broken?
No, I didn't say that. I'd like to see the photo of the
pin. I thought you said you had information that...
No. I'd like to see the inspections if a photo was taken of that.
Absolutely.
I mean, we talk about pasting and putting on some of these reports, but they shouldn't be pasting in the same photo.
No, the companies, there are different companies doing it every time, so there should be different photos.
So the photo should absolutely be current and new.
Right.
And the other thing, we talk about best practices, and that's kind of a unique bridge. And I've done a lot of work, I've done a lot of things in my lifetime, and we've done an X-raying, because again, concrete is porous, it's pre-stressed, it does weep water through it, water gets in there, it will corrode some of those. You mentioned the other pier that are inaccessible because they're encased in concrete.
Yep.
But we do, best practices would be X-raying of that. We used to do it on steel and stuff like that. But there's technology out there, and with this bridge, was X-raying done to see if any of the stuff that you couldn't see with the naked eye would show density changes over a period of time on the cables and the pins that you couldn't see that were encased? Was that part of best practices on these inspections specific to that bridge? Because I think that bridge would require that type of analysis as best practices. Was that done?
In hindsight, I think you may be right. Maybe it was. I don't know. I don't know if it's necessarily best practices for the kind of bridge and the kind of inspections that we get done, but I'll check on it, and I'm not sure that that kind of technology was used in the past, but I'll check and we'll report back to you.
Thanks. That's all I have.
Representative Cardillo, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Director, Mr. Alviti.
Hi.
Could you tell me, are you currently using any form of destructive testing to evaluate the post-tension system?
Destructive?
No, the non-destructive testing to evaluate.
Non-destructive testing, yes. Yes, we are.
Okay. And are you currently performing any kind of mapping of the post-tension system?
Yes, we are.
Okay. What visible issues led you to determine that the post-tensioning system be evaluated? You know, for defects.
I think a lot of that will be available for us to look at, even at DOT, when we get these reports in a few weeks from the 7 companies that are doing these investigations. Right now, they're not completely through the non-destructive testing phase, but they have performed, I think you saw on the presentation, we've gotten through a certain amount of non-destructive observations that showed us a number of concerns in terms of defects in the post-tensioning.
Okay. Then also, can you tell us when was the last time the post-tensioning system was inspected and how it was inspected, or who inspected it?
The entire bridge was inspected on an annual basis for at least the last 8 years. Not sure prior to that, before I got there. But in the last 8 years, every year for 8 years. But I'm not sure that they were employing the kind of advanced technology that we have now. Some of it wasn't even available even a short time ago.
Okay, and the last question. Then is it fair to state that if the post system has been compromised, that the result would be a complete tear down?
That's an assumption I'm not willing to make until I have all of the data in front of me.
Okay.
It just wouldn't be right for me I only have partial information on what we got so far, and until I see the complete results along with these 7 engineering expert companies making their recommendations to us, I can't make that supposition.
Thank you.
We will have the answer to that, though, and we'll report it back to you.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Representative Nadone?
Yes, Mr. Director, the bridges, you said it's done annually. Is that federal code? Does the federal government require that we do an inspection every year?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and we've been doing that annually, like you said, for the last 10 years?
Yes, it is.
The last inspection was done in July, I believe?
Yes.
And that is done by the program manager, or the program manager? Is that who does the inspection?
No. We have a pool of consultants that are hired on a master price agreement. Every so many years, a new RFP goes out for us to select several companies that will perform bridge inspections for DOT. They have expert inspectors in each one of these companies whose specialty is structural inspections of bridges. We hire them on a rotating basis, so every year we try to make it so that the same inspecting company doesn't do the same inspection on the same bridge in consecutive years. So we rotate them, so we have a different company every year looking at the bridge structure and a different set of experts looking at the structure.
Okay, is that, so you get a different opinion? Is
Yes.
that why that's done? Okay.
Every year.
All right, and I mean, myself, like Senator Rogers said, I'm looking at some of these photos, and it really looks to me like that is not something that just happened.
The separate from these inspecting companies, we have hired a forensic engineering company now who are experts in looking at they've looked at most of the major structural bridge failures in the last 50 years in the United States. This is what they do. They, to my knowledge, have never been a contractor to or a consultant to our DOT in Rhode Island before. So we hired them to take an independent look at how those pins broke, when they broke, and what are some of the explanations for that could have caused them to break that way. And also make recommendations on how, looking forward, we can assure ourselves that that kind of stuff doesn't happen. So they're going to be answering a lot of those questions that you're asking, and we'll be reporting all of that information back to this panel and to everyone in the state.
Okay, and have you looked at the westbound lanes as well, the westbound side?
The westbound lanes are relatively new. They're in good condition. They were only rebuilt about 15 years ago. So the eastbound. The eastbound lanes are relatively new. They were reconstructed, in fact, totally constructed about 15 years ago. At that time, you know, I don't know that they had the money or the resources or the plans, which is part of the problem that we fell into with roadworks, right? To do the eastbound lanes, the westbound lanes also. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little eastbound, it's getting late. There is no problem with those. They will carry not only the traffic that was originally on them, but the additional traffic that we rerouted on them for this purpose.
Okay, and the other question, it goes back to what Rep. Fiala said. You said bridges have a shelf life, you said 55 to 60 years, correct?
Yeah.
And this one is coming up at the end of that shelf life.
Yes.
Has this bridge, was it given special attention through the years, or a more detailed inspection, seeing that it was coming up at the end of its shelf life?
Yeah.
Knowing that this was...
So that's what we did in 8 years ago. Prior to 8 years ago, no, there was no special exception given. 8 years ago, when I got here, I had every bridge in the state inspected, and from that point on, we inspect them every year, some of them more frequently than that. This one was one that was coming back in poor condition, but you got to understand, you know, as I described to you, at that time, we had some 500 bridges in that category. And we fixed a lot of them so far, but we've still got a long way to go. And yes, this experience has heightened our concern in being able to provide additional inspection procedures that will preclude this from happening again.
Okay, and the other question I have is, knowing that you know, the bridges have a shelf life of 55 to 60 years, does DOT, do they have a contingency plan or some kind of mechanism where they know that these bridges are going to come, we'll say, offline, and that they're going to be replaced to budget that, or do you depend on federal funds? How does that work?
So part of that was the development of a 10-year plan. We never had a 10-year plan before either. We had a 4-year plan back in prior to 2015. We had a 4-year plan that was not funded, and there was no mechanism at DOT to be able to deliver the projects in that 4-year plan. So every 4 years, if you looked at the transportation improvement plan at DOT, a lot of the projects would get regurgitated. They'd show up in the 610 connector project is a great example. It had been in the work for 30 years. 30 years. When I got there, the plans for it were 10% complete. After 30 years of knowing they needed to rebuild it, but it just never got rebuilt. We put a 10-year plan in. We financed it with all of your help. We financed it. We put a delivery system in place to be able to correct this. And we are. We fixed 300 of those bridges in the last, more than we've ever fixed before, and we got a lot more to go, and we've got the mechanism, the funding, and the planning in place to do that. But what took us 60 years to get to a sorry state that we're in is going to take a little more than 10 years that we've given it to correct it all. We're taking a big chunk out of it already, and we're on a path to continue to make improvements to it so that we get down to zero eventually, which is ideally where we want this state to be, the best in the country.
Okay, I just got 2 more quick questions. The other question I have is that you have Barletta and Aetna doing the construction on the deck part of that bridge, on the westbound base. So what we're doing is we're going to have them do the work to try to shore up the bridge, or get it. Is that how? I thought I read that in the report. Did I misread?
Yeah, the only thing that we're having them do is to reestablish the pin connections at the places that the pins snapped. That's it. Beyond that, the new scope of work that's going to be done as part of the design build for whatever has to rebuild that bridge, the rest of the bridge, is going to go out as a separate contract for competition in a design build competition. And the best value that's provided to us is going to be the companies that will get that work.
So they're going to shore things up, is what I'm saying.
That's all they're doing, is shoring things up.
I don't understand why you would have a company working on the deck without looking at the foundation of the bridge before you start working on the deck. Why wouldn't you? It sounds like you're fixing the roof and the house needs new walls.
Right.
So could you speak to that a little bit?
Yes.
And why that?
So the inspection parts on the new walls that you're talking about that support the new roof, the inspection reports were telling us that they were adequate for the 25-year design lifespan of the new deck that we were putting on, and at that time, the bridge would be fully reconstructed. So this occurrence of the break of those pins brought about evidence that the problems were much worse than what was being reported in those inspection reports.
Okay, and one other question, I probably can't answer this. I know when we do construction projects on buildings, et cetera, they have like a square footage price of what it would cost to build a new building.
Yeah.
Is there a square footage price to replace the bridge where you could come up with a number to get an idea if that bridge is? I didn't think you were going to come get an answer, but I thought I'd throw it out there.
No. It'd be great if we did. I mean, we have budgeting kinds of concepts that we employ to formulate budgets in that, but even those are accompanied with some detailed designs, at least the 10% to allow us to scope it accurately and create a budget. In this case, that's the information that we'll be getting from these 7 engineering companies out there that will allow us to create an actual scope on which we'll be able to base a budget, but the final price will come out of a competition. We may actually get a better price than what we originally budgeted for it through the competition that we'll be doing in the design-build procurement process.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Rep. Brand, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Allman, you've been neglected in this in this hearing, so I want to direct a question to you. So, anyone that knows that has to travel on 195, everyone feels and has seen it. God forbid that there's a flat or a fender bender. Everyone knows what that causes for backup. And I'm talking about when both sides are operational at full capacity. You know the kind of traffic that can be generated. Director, you said at the outset of your comments, you said, we are going to be honest with you. And I think that that's a very important thing that we all expect as legislators, as taxpayers, as citizens. But I guess the question I have for Mr. Allman is, I look back and I see a post by Kim Kalunian on X, and it says, and this is posted on January 25th, and it says, Governor Dan McKee said yesterday that the Washington Bridge issues are only adding 10 to 15 minutes of extra commute time for drivers. He was pressed on that, and what are you experiencing behind the wheel? So I guess my question to you, Mr. Almond, is when we know that's demonstrably false, we see what's happening on the highways. I guess one question is, how is that at all helpful to the people in this room who have to communicate with their constituents? Because my constituents, and I think a lot of our constituents, don't have the will or the time or the ability to look at a pile of documents that's dumped. And I do agree with Vice Chair Casimiro. The fact that this is dumped to us on a Friday afternoon for a Monday hearing, it's, you know, that's just a whole separate issue. But I don't think that that's particularly helpful. But how are we as legislators and leaders in the state supposed to communicate with our constituents if this is the stuff that is coming from the top? And if honesty is supposed to be the best policy here, how are our constituents, how are the citizens of Rhode Island, the people that have to drive on this bridge every day, how are they supposed to feel secure about and confident in the information that they're being given is accurate and real when we've got the leader of the state saying, oh, it's only 10 or 15 minutes, and everybody knows that's false? What are we supposed to say to our constituents? What is the governor saying to the people of Rhode Island? And how can they feel like what they're getting, as the director said, is the truth? Because that's not it, Mr. Allman, and you know that. And the governor knows that. So why double down on it?
Well, I can't tell you when you're presented that way or say double down, I can't speak to that. What we can speak to is that we have spent a lot of time on travel times, but not to dispute those that are stuck in traffic, because we totally understand it, and on any given day that can triple with a single accident, which is a couple of times a week during the commute. What we're hoping to do with that information is we're looking at the average, and it's called the delta. It's not the total time it takes you to travel. It's the time it took you to travel before the bridge got closed, and what is the additional time you should expect to travel. And what we're hoping to do with that data is use it as a tool so that people can adjust their schedules, knowing that at a minimum, as you pointed out, because you're correct, at a minimum you should expect a delay of up to 15 minutes. That's a minimum. On any given day that can be a lot worse. If you look at the chart we presented you, it really isn't even a constant. There's days that it's completely almost clear at certain times. But we also want to use that to reach out, and I gave you an example of our Department of Health. They license every physician, every clinic, every physical therapy, every scanning thing on the East Bay. And our hope is that we are beginning to work with them now about scheduling. And can we pull people out of those worst times that you pointed out, because there are bad, very bad times. And there are other things we can do with our major employers on this side of the city to say, look, can we adjust schedules? Can you let more people work from home? So those things are all in process. But, you know, you are correct. The intent at this point with that information is not to contest people's frustration or debate that some of them have been stuck in traffic for a very long time. We did try to provide you with not just the bridge time, but routes coming in out of East Providence, various locations out of the East Bay. I'm sorry, that this travel time. So it's really just to try to present people a delta of what we know is the minimum average excess from what your previous trip would have been before we closed it.
Thank you. I think I would just merely comment that obviously we're in this hearing, we get these documents. An old boss once said to me, you know, you're bringing me the problems, bring me the solutions. And I think that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get the solutions. But we're not going to get the solutions unless we acknowledge that right now we have Carmageddon out there every single rush hour in the morning and at night, and we're trying to push the ocean through a garden hose. And we need to just be honest about that and figure out how that's going to get fixed and fast, because we're going to run out of answers to tell people other than you're just going to have to wait. And I can tell you, that's not what they want to hear.
And if I may just add, that's certainly not what we want as the outcome either. And I assure you, we're working every day to figure out how to make that garden hose bigger, okay? And to create a pipeline that gets people there faster than they are now. And we have some ideas that we're working on, and I think as we move into the design and the design build phase of this, we're going to see new ideas come out of that too. We're not going to stop once we even start construction, trying to find ways to reduce the impact of this, I assure you.
Thank you, Representative Breen. Representative Quattrochi?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, gentlemen. Some of the photos we have here of the existing tie downs, the deficient tie downs, they have a bigger diameter. Was that a previous repair? Is that what we're looking at? Where
No.
the rod comes down in a uniform diameter, and then it gets bigger?
No, it's an indication of what we would call necking, when a steel rod is in tension. The necking mechanism will reduce the diameter where there are additional stresses. So that's what you're seeing.
So those actual blocks that have square edges, those aren't repairs that were welded on from previously?
I'm not sure which.
We're looking at the tie rod that comes down one single diameter, and I know it's broken in spots and it's rusted in spots,
Yeah.
but there are spots where it's quite a bit larger, and it's like, it almost looks like a sleeve was put over it and welded on. That's what I'm asking.
I'd have to look at those particular pictures, but generally, the reduction in diameter that you saw near the center of the
I understand that,
rod
yeah.
was a necking kind of effect. But the particulars about the picture that you're referring to, I'd have to see.
You're not familiar with that picture, okay.
Yeah.
Now, kind of bouncing off Representative Nardone's questions, the eastbound lanes were rebuilt fairly recently.
About 15 years ago.
And they're sufficient.
Yes.
Would rebuilding of the bridge include that section also?
No. No, we don't have to touch the eastbound.
That doesn't have to be touched, that wouldn't be
No.
included in a
No,
tear down?
No, that has many, many years of useful life ahead, and it's in relatively good condition.
Well, that's good news. You mentioned working under bridges while traffic continues above, and, you know, we've all seen the wooden blockings that are put under the beams of bridges to support them while traffic can flow above. Are you guys looking into anything that we can resume traffic up there, like, fairly quickly? I know you can't put blocking on water and support the beams.
Yeah.
I mean, can't we, and of course, I'm not an engineer, but can't we fasten I-beams to the footings to support the defective beams temporarily, so we can get traffic moving while you folks are doing what you're doing now?
I wish it were that simple.
Maybe I
really
made
do.
it simplistic, but
Yeah,
is it
no.
being looked into at all?
Absolutely. We're looking, right now, I've got 7 companies at the same time looking at every alternative available to
What
be
about that
able to-
alternative? To brace
Well, that-
those, so we can get traffic?
I can't say that that's even an alternative that's possible. I can't say that until I get the results of their analysis. And we should have that by the end of this month, the very beginning of next.
Okay. 1 second here, let me just... I'm trying to refer to one of the, some of the information that we were forwarded. The Rhode Island Department of Transportation Inspection Manual for Bridges, that we were forwarded Chapter 5. Was this in effect when you came in, or did you implement this?
I think some of the standards were implemented in 2013, but we've made a lot of improvements to them
Okay.
since then.
So I'm sure you're familiar with it. It says that RIDOT makes every effort to utilize a pair rotation, in quotations, system for routine bridge inspections. Pair rotation is a systematic rotation of bridge inspection teams that reduce the probability of having the same inspectors inspect the same bridges, and may lead to complacency and potentially reduce the quality of the inspections. This is a pretty fair warning here. Is this what happened?
No. As a matter of fact, this bridge was inspected by different companies. And we do that, and we hired several...
So it was multiple failures then?
We say it again?
Multiple failures then of... They all failed.
Well,
didn't
we don't know. And part of the work that we're having done right now is for a forensic engineering company to determine when those pins actually broke, okay? That will tell us how far back the inspections reports were either correct or incorrect. And when we have that, we'll be reporting out, and I assure you, we'll be looking at all of the responsibility issues that go along with that.
I'm sure you're familiar with the saying, not to let a good tragedy go to waste, or something to that effect.
That's not a phrase that I use or practice.
Well, okay, but you know, you mentioned us advocating for us to finish our investments that we're involved in. Would that include reopening tolls, even if we have to toll cars to help fund all this?
I think the governor has already said that tolling this bridge is not an option.
Okay, all right. I think that's it, Chair. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rep. Andy?
Thank you, Chairman and Chairwoman. And thank you all for being here patiently going through these things that we're all concerned with. I think a lot of folks know I work a lot on issues around transit and bicycles and things like that, so I wanted to start with those because one of the concerns I had, and I went back and looked on the website, and today was the first I even heard we'd looked into plowing on the East Bay Bike Path. I was happy to hear it, but I was a little concerned that one of the problems is nobody knows that we were doing that. And probably it hasn't been, I guess there probably hasn't been that much snow on the path along the way, but I would say that would be a no-cost thing, is to make sure we add that to our outreach and making sure that people do know that that's occurring as an option, because that is definitely one of the things I think has been missing is even if it's only a handful more people a day, 20 more people a day that are taking a bike, that's could have a potentially beneficial number there.
I agree.
And then I did like the idea of the ferries, but I also saw that it seemed like the numbers were sort of anemic, and again, with the no-bid contract and things like that, it made sense to let that go for now. But I think that Senator Royer might be right that maybe there's a way to look at it more going forward. But I wanted to know, I felt like, because that seemed like, I don't remember the right term for it, the same thing we were talking about, like going for all the different types of energy. I can't remember the term that the DC folks are always using, talking about doing everything we can. Around RIPTA, it seems like there's a lot of options we could have added, like adding shuttle buses or something like that to significantly up the number of people able to take RIPTA across that bridge and reduce the number of cars. Was that looked into? Was that considered?
Not yet.
I mean, just with the ferry being such a quick and sudden, rapid thing, it seems like, well, we could have pretty easily thrown like 25 or 30 more runs of small buses or something like that.
By the way, I agree 100%. Working with RIPTA more closely lately, having the benefit of doing that, I could see that even their existing number of routes are placing both a financial and an operational load on them, particularly from the standpoint of actually having additional drivers that we would be able to employ to do that kind of work. To that end, one of the things I asked early on when I came on board as chairman was if RIPTA itself could re-engage with the union to open up negotiations for additional contract provisions that would increase salaries for new incoming bus drivers to try and attract more and increase the number of drivers they have available to do things like what you're talking about, right?
But
and we did that.
Yeah, but I mean, to me, I think you potentially would have to go outside of the sort of normal track on an emergency basis, like you did with the ferries. Those weren't
and do private contractors,
something like that in the short term. Again, I think longer term, I'm certainly a fan of building RIPTA capacity and things like that over that time frame. But something that's what I was sort of, because we rushed quickly into the ferry and made that such a quick. I was just sort of, again, obviously, it wasn't something that came up as an option.
You know something. No, it hasn't, but. It's a good idea. I mean, we'll take a look at it from DOT's standpoint, maybe not from RIPTA's. We'll look at what kind of federal highway funding might be available to supplement that, because I know RIPTA's budget is fairly tapped out. But if there is availability through the Federal Highway Administration to provide project funding that could be allocated to that kind of transit, we'll look at it. We'll look at it, and I'll report back to you.
No, I appreciate it. And again, I still think you potentially could push it through RIPTA in the same way that you guys used to have half-price passes to reduce congestion price and things like that. That sort of thing. That was DOT funded, but obviously use RIPTA as the end point for that.
I assure you, we'll take a look at all of those options and what kind of funding mechanism we can get in place for it.
And then I know somebody else had mentioned to me about talking about lane width and things like that. Are there things like that you guys have looked at, like potentially reducing the number of lane widths so you actually increase the, I don't know enough about it in terms of traffic management.
All of the lane stuff, we've got engineers working on that.
All right. Oh, sorry, I thought that was somebody asking a question over there. This actually gets off aside from what I was going to ask, but I noticed that when it was talking about your timeline, it mentions WPRO constantly through, well, I shouldn't say constantly, it mentions WPRO like 5 or 6 times, but no other news outlet along the way in terms of things that you did during that time window. Is there a reason WPRO is the only one that winds up being up on there?
No, I think that it was only reported out because it was actually a fixed item in my weekly schedule.
So you already normally were on those,
Yeah,
in those shows?
For the last 8 years, I've been on every Thursday morning between 8 and 8:30. So that shows up repeatedly in my schedule. So I think whoever put this together just reported out on that. That was on my schedule at that time.
I mean, but you're on Gene Valicenti, Tara Granham, Dan York, Matt Allen. So it's actually, you're on a bunch of the different ones, but I was just...
Yeah, during that time, I think we got calls from them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was also did interviews with Kim Kalunian and a number of other people.
Yeah,
that
that's what, it was sort of through lack of any other one reference. It sort of made me think, well, maybe that's why I didn't know about the bike paths, because I don't want to listen to WPRO or something like that. That's what I was wondering about. Nothing wrong with some of the people.
I hear you. I hear you. Okay. We'll try and broaden our communications on these issues.
Let's see. In terms of the look back and that sort of forensic thing, well, that also, again, I don't want to even imply that there was anything sort of necessarily untoward with what was done. But if there was something that was sketchy in terms of behavior or something like that, is that likely to show up in that type of a forensic look back, whether it's the governor's or feds or your look back?
Yes, it will.
Okay, all right.
There are so many layers of this that looking at it, those kinds of things are bound to come up. We have our forensic engineering study of it that will tell us when and if it failed, which may indicate some of the things you're talking about. Then there's the governor's oversight of that if those things do exist, I'm sure we'll look further at them. And then there's the Federal Highway Administration itself that is continuously monitoring the results of all of these studies. And now there's the Department of Justice that's looking at the particular element, the pins themselves, to track their history to see what happened. So those concerns of yours will certainly be addressed, and anything that occurred with them will come out.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it does sound like because you rotate the inspectors, it's less likely for it to be something sort of systemic. But at the same time, I just was trying to
whatever it is, it'll come out, and we'll report out on it.
And then you said that like 10 years ago or so, inspections were sporadic at best.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have prior to this incident? Do you guys have? I heard you saying annual or sometimes more than annual.
Yeah.
Are you planning on increasing that number? So now with this look back, that maybe that wasn't sufficient. What we've been doing the last 10.
Yes, we already have. We've identified, particularly in our inventory, some of the bridges that are more complex, that we'll be applying a separate kind of more complex reporting on.
All right, and I think I just had one other one. I also read the Globe article. I also was a little anxious about how that came across, because I think it's not just about perceived functionality. It also potentially, because you guys have such a grave responsibility, this bridge is a great example of that. If people are afraid to speak up, so I'm saying this more in terms of how I perceived it, and the anxiety it gave me was that people are afraid to speak up, and that was my impression. Toxic work environment is one thing, but another is that sort of fear of retribution, fear of something like that, and that could come from things like management training and that sort of thing. So I'd urge your top management to look at that more seriously. Again, I understand you don't think it's got credence. Maybe the folks you feel like aren't really maybe speaking for the whole staff, but I would worry that that it's maybe a bit more of a problem than you're aware of if it's coming into this level of fray, because this what we're talking about that just happened could have easily been something where people would have been nervous about reporting up to the next step up the line for fear of overemphasizing something or over-explaining or making people worry, because I have heard that essentially somebody at the top, not necessarily in your administration, but above you even, or above, might be upset about something. Now it goes right down to that one person that unfortunately gets sort of ostracized or sent to work in Siberia or something.
I understand completely what you're saying. That's always a concern for me, which is why early on at DOT, in creating the new management structure, right from the top, I tried to emphasize a culture that is the complete inverse of what you're talking about. That is, instead of if you report something, you lend yourself to criticism or persecution. Quite the opposite, the inverse of that, is that the only thing at DOT, and I've said this a number of times to the employees, to our, even when I have full-body employee assemblies, you know, that where I get to talk to a large number of them at one time. The only thing that really, that I've tried to emphasize and embed in the culture of DOT is the very necessity to report up any problem that you see, so that it's not just you working on it, but now when you report it up, you've got 2, 3, 5, 10, 20 people helping you solve that problem, and to create a management structure and culture that actually encourages the inverse of what your concern is, that encourages, if you see a problem, you can readily bring it to the attention of your immediate supervisor, and you know you can count on you're going to get help in solving it, not criticism for having said it, right? And I also emphasize that really, there's really only one single thing that could create a serious condition between DOT as your employer and you, is that if you are dishonest. Honesty is the only thing that I ask for from my employees. That's it. If you're honest, regardless of how it is, and that goes all the way up to management. So it would include management that takes part in any kind of a culture that discourages their subordinates from being honest. That's the only serious thing that you do at DOT. So honesty and the ability to count on a management structure that if you report it up, you can do it. And I have to tell you, my sense is that has been working. That's the way it is. I think if you read further into the articles that you read, you could see embedded in some of the complaints the real reasons, and they're not because a supervisor was toxic. There were other reasons.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rep. Director, gentlemen, it's been over 3 hours.
It has.
If you do want to take a couple minutes, we can power through this, and I think everyone would like to do that.
Yeah, I'm with you. As long as my colleagues are with me.
That's fine.
Okay. Then we'll go to Representative Shawcross-Smith, please.
Thank you, Chairs. Appreciate everyone's time this evening. Going back to 2016 with the 270 bridges that have been fixed in Rhode Island, it's pretty impressive. Are they all completely fixed? Are they all finished?
Yes. Those 270 are completely fixed. We currently are doing, I don't know, maybe at about another 50, 60 as we sit here, and we have plans for doing hundreds more during the next several years.
Right. So whatever becomes of the bridge that we have now, would there be some type of a timeline that Rhode Islanders will have, whatever decision needs to be made to go forward?
On this one?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely. We'll be able to, from the information that we get from these consultants, we'll be able to develop a scope of what work has to be done, and we'll make some initial estimates as to what, depending upon how much work has to be done, how long it's going to take. But the real definitive schedule that we're going to get is once we're able to put this into procurement and hire, and actually have the competition to hire companies that will actually do the work. Part of the scoring system, you remember I said in the selection of the companies that do the work, part of the scoring system is going to be how good you manage, your team is proposing to manage traffic. Another major component of it is going to be how fast you can get it done. The faster you can get it done, the more points your companies are going to score. So we'll know definitively then, once we go through that procurement and select a company, exactly how long it's going to take. And last year we hit those 100% on the mark. So that'll really determine finality in that. And we're going to accelerate that procurement process so that we get a team on board real quick to do that work.
Right.
So hopefully we'll know that soon.
From the time situation happened on the bridge, how long was it before you were notified?
From the time that the initial signing was made that there may be a problem to the time that I was notified, it was a weekend from Friday to Monday.
Do you think that was unacceptable? Or
So
I know you said there's
here's
federal
the thing about
policies
that.
in place.
I told
From
you,
your
I said
personal
before that,
perspective.
I said before that we have a process in place that was endorsed by the Federal Highway Administration
Yep, you said that.
that we have been using to do that. And it's kept the 300 bridges that we already did done in a fashion that didn't result in this kind of thing. That doesn't mean that that's perfect.
Okay.
Okay? And I have already had discussions with this about the governor. He expected that he would be informed in situations like this sooner. I likewise. We've already started making the changes at DOT so that that happens, that advance notice happens. Don't wait to the point of what our normal operating procedure and the Federal Highway Administration told us when it becomes a critical finding, which happened on Monday. I was noticed immediately, and the governor was noticed immediately. The question is, can we make that better? It doesn't have to be as good as the federal government tells us it should be. It could be made better, and the governor's made it clear that he wants it made better, and we're doing that.
It sounds like people were not frightened to ask questions from your perspective. But what the Globe said had a very different perspective. Is that something your administration is going to do for your employees to kind of bring the team together, to kind of really understand?
So, yeah, I mean, the first thing I'm doing, and the governor is aware of this, and we spoke about this, and he recommended that I meet with these union officials, and I'm meeting with them, I think, tomorrow. And I've already talked to the other unions that we have traditionally. I mean, I came from a union background. I'm a union guy. Come on, we all know that. We knew that when I came here, and you brought me into this position. So, union relations is very important to me. Of course, it is.
And I'd like to also say that kudos to Ms. McCarthy and your staff. As you know, I'm working on a project with them, and they have been. Cynthia's amazing.
She is, and
your staff is, yes.
I got to tell you, I really am blessed with people like her, and she's an example of somebody that works really hard, and there's a lot of pressure on her, but. I mean, I don't know what she's told you, but she seems pretty happy to me to be doing it. So
absolutely,
that's the kind of employee that we like to have.
She's got great communication, so thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
everyone's time.
All right, last one is Representative Messier.
Rep. Messier?
Thank you, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here tonight. Being last, most of my concerns have already been discussed. My main one was how can a significant amount of damage occur between inspections?
Yeah.
And I think that's something everybody wants to know.
Me too.
Yeah, so do we look more into the inspection part of it, or who's doing it, a better reporting on every inspection?
Yeah. All of the above, and I think the results we get from the maybe 3 or 4 levels of forensic, which is a look back. It's like, after something happens, you look back.
Right.
I think that's going to give us a clear understanding not only of what happened, but if we need to do anything to make it better.
Yes.
Okay?
Absolutely.
And I'll certainly get that information to all of you.
Okay.
To the entire population of Rhode Island.
And I just had another quick question. Do you know how old the oldest bridge is in Rhode Island that is still in use, and where it is?
That's a good question. So there's one we fixed in Wickford recently, which is named after the original, back in 1908, the original bridge engineer, or the state bridge engineer. It's a concrete structure that's pretty old. I know that the Mount Hope Bridge is one of the oldest. But you know something? I don't know what the actual oldest one is. That, you piqued my interest now. I'm
Well,
going to look for it.
there is
now.
one in Pawtucket that was built in 1886.
Well, there you go.
It's the Division Street Bridge. It was used when they were making repairs on 95.
Yes.
They used that for
Yes,
months.
I
And,
heard about that,
At one time,
yes.
no tractor trailers were to be allowed on that bridge, but when they needed it for 95, tractor trailers, and I still use it. I use it almost
Went
every
right
day.
over,
So,
yeah.
Guess
Well-
they don't make them like they used to.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, we're trying to reverse that now. The new bridges that we're making, we're trying to build them so that they don't just last 50 or 60 years, but 100 years.
Right.
And that's how we've been building them lately.
And we're not around to take any.
That's quite all right. That's quite all right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're down to the final voices in our lineup, which will be Senator Zurier.
Well, actually, Representative, Senator
Senator Lawson.
Lawson, and then Rep. Zuria, and then you and I will close out, if that's okay. Did we, what?
I'm sorry.
Well, we're giving a little leeway to the East Bay folks.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Again, thank you, Director Alviti, for joining us this evening. And I just have one real quick question. I'd just like to confirm that once you have access to all the reports to make the final decision on the fate of the bridge, that the public will also have access to all of them, even if there are reports that disagree with the state's final decision. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
Senator Zuria.
Thank you, chairs. And thank you for your presentation, and thank you for your patience. I'd like to start with some data requests. The first is that the bridge inspection reports make a reference to Element 109 defect table PDF. All of the reports from the July reports have a reference to that. And I'd like to request those Element 109 defect tables, please.
Okay, I didn't write that down, but I assume that somebody is scribing this or will have a visual so that I can get that particular. Can you repeat that, please?
Sure. For example, on page 10 of the 2020 report, the Element 109 description, which is what we're all focused on.
Element 109, yes.
Yeah. It says, attached file 070001, that's the Washington Bridge.
Yeah.
Element 109 defect table PDF.
Okay. We'll search that out and we'll get that to you.
Okay, thank you. The next document request, and this is building on Reps. Narette and Chippendale. I'd like, if to the extent feasible, the daily logs or field notes that refer to or relate to Span 7 from AECom, VHB, RIDOT, and Aetna.
Okay.
The next thing is, and it's whether it's feasible to bring in someone who can speak about the photographs related to Element 109, Span 7 in the July inspections of 2020 to 23.
Okay.
And the reason,
You're saying the person that was responsible for taking and posting that as part of the report?
well, it doesn't have to be that person. It could be
Okay.
someone from the inspection company who can
I
talk
understand.
about the photos.
Yep.
Because as Rep. Chippendale said, he ran into a problem when he was looking at the language of these reports because it's all boilerplate, and he
Right.
wasn't able to tell what the inspector saw and what the inspector didn't see.
Gotcha.
So, putting that back to RIDOT, did that raise any eyebrows at RIDOT when you got these reports? And because of the boilerplate language, you couldn't tell what the inspector saw or what the inspector didn't see?
Well, no, we at RIDOT expect the inspectors or the companies that are inspecting to tell us if things rise to a level of concern about an element that they may have or may not have had access to be able to advise us on what we should do also as part of their reporting responsibility in their contracts to to make us aware of things that we may need to do in order to make their job complete.
Okay. Building on Senator Rogers' suggestion about X-rays, does BDI conduct ultrasonic testing? Your current
I believe,
testing?
yes, I believe one of the tests that, oh, you can answer.
I believe that's the case.
Yeah. As was mentioned before, ultrasonic testing has the advantage of allowing you to detect things that you cannot see.
Right.
Is that a technique that RIDOT had considered using for the Washington Bridge prior to the recent engagement of BDI?
I'm not sure if we did. I know in the past, those units were much larger and not as mobile as they are now. That allows handheld devices to be used in such confined spaces as they're using them in now. But I'll find out and we'll report back on that.
Okay. One of the documents we received was called Final Report, Comparative Testing of Radiographic Testing, Ultrasonic Testing, and Phased Array, written for the Florida Department of Transportation Research Center in 2014. Do you know how that document ended up in our pile?
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, I guess that'll be another request.
Oh, there you go. Okay, I'll find out how it got there.
Yeah. Now,
Or why it got there.
this is a question for Mr. Klein. You mentioned that VHB's contractor, VN, went and inspected Span 7. Who inspected Span 7 in December of 2023, December 8?
VHB was in the field that week.
How did VHB decide to look at that span at that time?
Sure, that's a good question. Our contractor was doing some painting work as part of the design build activities, and we were out there looking at seeing whether any additional steel repairs were required after that painting activity.
I see. And was that isolated to Span 7? Or
Correct,
was it?
yeah, Span 7 is the only steel span on the structure.
I see. Okay, thank you. Okay, those are my questions. Thank you so much.
Okay. Director, I'm following up on Senator Zurier, Senator Rogers, I believe Senator Takoyan had some questions along these lines. You know, I look at the critical findings, the report, and the photos, particularly at number 4 and number 8, ones that show the shearing of the rods. And I'm still not entirely sure I know, in your view, does the rusting that we see in these photos, does that represent what happened between July of 2023 and December of 2023?
No, I don't believe so. I think the rusting took place over a long period of time.
Okay. And I'm looking at the similar ones that show the diameter down to 1 inch, and I assume that it was previously at 2 inches or 3 inches. And similar question, that didn't occur between July and December of 2023?
No, I don't believe so. I think the necking showed up in previous reports, but it never rose to the level of concern of being a critical finding.
Okay. I look at the July 2023 inspection report, and it doesn't appear to show that all the tie-down rods were viewed at that time. Is that fair to state?
I think as previously mentioned in the presentation, some of the rods are actually embedded in concrete.
Understood.
So they were not visible.
But these ones
I'm
that are
not
visible.
I'm not sure. I think part of what the forensic analysis and report that we haven't done will determine which ones were visible and were they reported on or not.
Okay. And obviously, if the tie-down rods weren't inspected in July of 2023, it's not possible to know whether that deterioration or that shearing took place between July and December.
I think I think, again, the forensic engineering study that we're having done actually took samples of these rods and is subjecting them to testing that will tell us when they broke. And we'll be reporting that back to you.
In looking at this in retrospect, would you now be of the sense that because tie-down rods can deteriorate like this or be sheared like this, that a thorough inspection should have included looking at the tie-down rods in July of 2023?
It was always our opinion that the reports that were submitted by these various companies and the responsibilities of these companies were very much to report out on any concern they had about the structural integrity of those, including not only those, but the rest of the structure.
I'm looking at the answer to question 20 that we had asked about when was the span with the broken pins originally scheduled to be repaired, replaced. And the answer was the span was being rehabilitated under the contract, the pertinent contract for Washington North Phase 2. But it goes on to say that the tie-down rods, pins, were not part of the rehabilitation contract.
Right.
Why would that be?
Well, that would be in a rehabilitation of a bridge. We look at the various components in the reports that tell us the integrity of the rest of the bridge. And then we'll rehabilitate the portions of the bridge that are deteriorated the most. In this case, the bridge deck was severely deteriorated. And we had the design build team design a bridge deck that would last 25 years. And at that time, the engineering data that we had on the rest of the structure was that it would match that time frame. So we would get another 25 years worth of use out of this structure. That didn't end up being the case, did it? And I think the forensic analysis and the work that we're having done from these several companies are going to tell us, are going to answer a lot of the questions that both we have and you have about that process.
I understand that. I'm just trying to figure out with a bridge that, as you noted, is at the end of its useful life.
Yep.
Almost 60 years old.
Yep.
We're spending a huge amount on that contract, which is, as you said, to look at the deck primarily.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they at least look at what's below the deck and look at those rods?
That, in fact, was the basis on which the decision was made to do the deck, was that the rest of the structure would have lived the similar time period that the new deck that they were placing on it.
I'm still having a tough time figuring out why they wouldn't look at the rods.
We know now that, well, we're trying to figure out because we know now that that was wrong, right?
Yep.
So, but the question is, why was it wrong, and what responsibilities lie with those decisions?
Okay.
Okay, and we're finding that out. We'll report out, and whatever the findings are, they are.
Okay. Following up on Senator Zurier and a couple of others, it's my understanding that there are FWHA-approved advanced bridge condition assessment technologies. Now, it was mentioned before, maybe ultrasound. I had seen an indication of MRI, and I don't know whether they were referring to MRI-like.
It's MRI-like, and yes, we have employed those during the last, I know during the last 8 years on other bridges. I'm not sure whether they were employed on this or whether they're employed on the deck of this or making the assessment of the deck, but I'll find out and let you know.
I'm just thinking, my understanding is they're much more reliable than visual inspections, particularly when we've got rods encased in concrete.
Yep.
And so my question is, with all the monies we've spent on roadworks that began 9 years ago, why would we not be using these types of technologies to make sure our bridges are structurally sound?
So I think that's a point well taken for the ones that are really advanced in age and getting close to their useful life.
Like this one.
Like this one. I absolutely agree with that. On the ones that are in good, fair, or even at the beginning of the poor condition, the expense is precluded by the usefulness, right, of that data for bridge that's in good repair. To actually go through the expense of these very expensive kinds of tests that could increase the level of expenditures on this. And if a bridge is, we know historically, when those kinds of new methodology and more advanced methodologies actually yield a useful result. And we're looking at when that is and how to implement that into our routines.
Okay. Let me just ask you about this bridge in particular. It was put out to bid initially in 2016?
It was what?
Put out to bid initially in 2016?
So there was, I believe, yes, in 2006, or maybe even predated that.
The Carty contract?
Yes, there was a contract that was put out
And they
earlier.
began work, and they spent about $18.2 million?
Yes.
Okay. Then that contract was stopped, am I right?
It was.
Okay. And I'm just wondering, did they inspect the tie-down rods in the course of spending the $18 million we gave them?
No, I think that comes out of some report on work that they were proposing as part of one of their contract proposals, that they proposed a certain kind of pin construction. And the confusion comes on in the terminology pin. The component that they rendered an opinion on, or their consultant rendered an opinion on, was on another part of the bridge under a different contract for a different component. None of it had to do with the pins that severed.
Were warnings given to DOT regarding the design for that rehabilitation back then?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. At one point, you spoke about the engineering unit that you have at DOT. There's been word that DOT's in-house bridge and inspection ranks have become reduced in recent years, and that DOT's been more focused on getting construction done, understandably.
Yep.
But the suggestion is that design and engineering may have been shortchanged to some degree in the course of this, and that DOT may no longer have sufficient in-house capacity to deal with design.
No.
Okay. And my question is, what's the difference in number of engineers at DOT that are working on design now versus, I can't ask you about before you got there, but versus 2015?
So you've got to parse that. Bridge engineers that have to do with inspections and bridge engineers that were formerly there having to do with design, right? So when we changed into a project management kind of organization, we also made the decision to take the bridge design folks and outsource that to private companies, like the ones that are sitting here next to me. The bridge inspection unit was retained. Right now, we have 8 people in that division. And their sole responsibility is to monitor the reporting that we get annually, to look at the reporting, along with FHWA, look at that reporting on the bridge inspections. The bridge design unit at the time, I like to say, were the red pencil group. And what was happening with the bridge design part of DOT was that we would hire companies to design bridges for us, and then we would put them out to bid. And the companies that designed our bridges for us would submit their plans to what was called the design section of DOT, but they never really designed anything. What they did was they reviewed the plans of the consultants. And sometimes they would actually redline them. And the consultants would say, oh, fine with us, you redlined our plans, we'll do it this way. And then when it came time for a problem in the field, the contractor would say, oh, there's a defect in the plans, and the design companies would say, oh yeah, but see, these red lines, we designed it the way your folks told us, so we're not responsible. And all the finger pointing would always go back to DOT, and DOT was spending millions of dollars because of the faults that were taking place between contractors and engineers. So we modified that. When we put in place the project management style of project delivery, we eliminated the red pencil set. Some of them got reassigned to other duties, but the But the outsourcing of that took place in the form of an owner's representative engineering company that oversees the design of that are being submitted to us by the various design build teams. So, yes, we did that, but that actually made us better. It didn't make us worse. It made us better in terms of providing results that are better, faster, cheaper for folks.
Thank you. Madam Chair?
Thank you. Well, thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to wrap up with one observation, and Director, this is not said to pander to you, but it's been rather refreshing for me as the Chairwoman of House Oversight for you to acknowledge and accept full responsibility for this failure and to apologize to the people who have been unfortunately affected by it. It doesn't excuse the situation in any way, shape, or form, but it's not been my experience that anyone is willing to accept the blame. It's been my experience, it's been deflect, well, we didn't know, well, we weren't sure. So at least I appreciate that, Director. I appreciate and commend you for that. You've got a lot of work to do, but I commend you for that. And I've learned from this that you have a long way to go. You've already made some changes as a result of the missteps. And my questions are very brief. This is obviously not the only bridge that is this old. We've had to have other bridges built in 67, 68, 69. Do you know how many there are in the state?
I can get you an exact number, but they're in the hundreds that we have yet to get to. In other words, we had 500 of them like this. We've done about 270, so there are a couple of hundred or 300 more to do. And we're on track, and we've identified them. We're on track to get them done. And we're working on many of them right now as we sit here, being reconstructed. So this was a kind of a... If you folks, any of you were around at Roadworks, I actually showed you a graph of the number of structurally deficient bridges that we had. And in that graph, it not only showed if we implemented Roadworks how it would decline, but it showed the number of other bridges that 8 years ago were not structurally deficient, that if we didn't fix those also during the course of time, they would by now be structurally deficient. As a matter of fact, at this point in time, I think we had it at over 50% of our bridges would be structurally deficient right now in this state. That would be on the order of 600 bridges, 700 bridges being structurally deficient. Now, we're reducing that considerably, more than we ever have in the past, but we still have a way to go. You're right. We still have a way to go.
And we do, Director. And, you know, Leader Chippendale's one of his questions about there never having been a weight limit sign on that bridge.
Yep.
That got the gears turning, and now that you tell me that there are about 100 bridges this old, for those of us who don't like bridges under the best of circumstances, truly, and I know I'm not the only one. I mean, are these old bridges, like, are they going to get a second intensive look?
Yes.
I mean, maybe there should be weight limits. Use one lane. What do I know? But it's kind of a scary thought.
Yep. And I know it is, and part of what we're trying to do right now is to assure people that this really was an anomaly in the whole inventory of bridges that we needed to fix, and we are fixing. This one was an anomaly for a number of reasons. I think what makes it an anomaly will become perfectly clear as we get the results of this forensic. But it also, I assure you, has heightened our awareness and our senses at DOT to the need to put additional insight into particularly some of the ones that are comparable in complexity to this bridge that we have left to do, and make sure that between now and then, instead of we may modify even our project scheduling so that while we try to stay away from worst first, that is, fix the worst ones first, and move into an asset management kind of application, which in the long run gets us to the same place, but a lot faster and a lot cheaper. It is difficult for us to move back into that paradigm, but we're considering that. So we're considering a lot of things right now that we didn't up until now.
And, you've acknowledged that it's safety first, and certainly
Yes,
we have
always.
about, on the House side, about 15,000 constituents each, and on the Senate side, about 30,000 constituents each. And certainly their safety is important to us as it is to you.
That's when I wake up every day and I go to sleep every night, that's all that's on my mind.
I believe that. And as I said, when I asked you how many bridges there were of this age, I thought you were going to maybe say 10 or 20. And now the fact that you said that there are about 100, that's really scary to me. And, we want our folks to be secure and be confident that they
I
can
do
trust
too.
the bridges are safe.
Yep.
So, Director and gentlemen, thank you for your patience, for your endurance. For the folks out there, I thank you as well. To my colleagues in government in both the House and